Under the waves, under the deserts, under the myths, they were not first. In all the continents there are ruins too old, too complex and too perfectly aligned to explain who built them, when and why they disappeared under the floods, the fire and the silence. From Atlantis to Agartha, this is not a history lesson. It is a descent into the forbidden chapters of our past. One by one, we will unearth civilizations that time tried to erase and ask the question that nobody dares to ask. What if the flood did not end the world? It restarted it. Before delving deeper, make sure to subscribe. This rabbit hole is very deep, and you will not want to miss what comes next. And since you are here, leave a comment below. From what part of the world do you see us? And what time is it now? Because if there is something that these ancient civilizations have taught us, it's that the opportune moment is everything. Atlantis. It begins, as always, with a flash of water and a whisper of memories. A name older than cities, older than writings. Atlantis. The name resonates like thunder through the centuries, engraved in marble, written on parchment, turned into clickbait until falling into oblivion. But before becoming a joke or tourist trap, Atlantis was terror. Atlantis was amazement. Atlantis was the truth, or at least a truth so old that it was lost in translation. Plato started it all. Timaeus and Critias, those two dialogues that nobody reads unless they are looking for legends, spoke of a powerful island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a land richer than dreams, ruled by kings descendants of gods and armed with a fleet so large that darkened the sea. They built temples of orichalcum, hunted in vast irrigated meadows, and handled a technology that, if you squint, looks like science fiction. Earthquakes, floods, in a single day and a single night of misfortunes. Ogden sank into the ocean like a tale whispered by Poseidon himself. Now comes the curious thing. Plato swore he was not making this up. He said that the story came from Solon, the famous Athenian legislator, who had collected it during a trip to Egypt. The Egyptian priests, surrounded by parchments older than Greek civilization itself, told him about a war between Athens and Atlantis 9,000 years before his time. That is 12,000 years ago for us. Right at the end of the Younger Dryas, when the ice melted, when the sea rose, when something big happened. Now, let's pause. Not because drama though is convinced, but to ask ourselves, what is more suspicious? That Plato lied, or that he told the truth? And we have spent the last 2,300 years laughing at the idea because it is too big to believe. You see, the thing about Atlantis is that it is at the crossroads of too many uncomfortable truths. Start pulling the thread, and you will find yourself unraveling something more than a myth. Suddenly, you find yourself facing geological evidence of a sudden rise of sea level. You are looking at submerged ruins off the coast of Cuba. You are comparing Plato's city of concentric rings with satellite images of the Eye of the Sahara in Mauritania, also known as the Rikhat structure. Yes, that eye, that perfect circular formation in the Western Sahara, the one that nobody can explain. Faded geological rings that were once believed volcanic, but suspiciously coincide with the dimensions of Plato's Atlantis, in a desert that was once fertile and fed by rivers, where bones of elephants have been found in abundance, those sacred animals of Atlantis. Coincidence, or ancestral memory? The story of a sunken kingdom is not unique. Almost all cultures have a myth about a flood, a submerged city, a disappeared people. From Samri and Araridu to Dvarka in India, from the Celtic sages to Doggerland, lost under the North Sea. The oceans are cemeteries, and we, terrestrial creatures with the attention span of squirrels, are the amnesiac descendants of the survivors. But what really breaks the barrier of logic is technology. Plato describes something suspiciously modern. Irrigation systems so advanced that they look like buildings built with glass-like metals. An armada so vast that it rivals post-industrial empires. The kind of things that should not exist circa 9600 BC. See, unless we are wrong about everything. Unless history is not linear. It is cyclic. And if that is true, if civilizations arise, fall, and resurge, then Atlantis is not a fable. It is a warning. One written in stone, water, and fire. The conspiracy theorists, mystics, and geologists, with too much wine, have all tried to claim it. But Atlantis does not belong to any of them. Atlantis belongs to the depths. It belongs to the black silence under the waves, to the ancient pulse of something that lived and died and that perhaps is waiting to be found again. And maybe that is the real reason why we laughed at it. Not because it is ridiculous, but because it is uncomfortable. Because we are standing on the bones of giants and pretending we are on top. Atlantis is the itch that we cannot scratch. The memory that we have buried under skyscrapers and satellites. A ghost in the global subconscious. But Atlantis did not just disappear. It infected. The idea spread like spores in the archaeological subconscious. It is the model, the seed crystal, the definitive origin story of all topics about lost civilizations. And maybe that is not a coincidence. Maybe Atlantis was real. And more importantly, maybe it was not alone. Let's talk about materials. The orichalcum, a mysterious metal that shines like fire, described as only surpassed in value by gold. Plato mentioned it casually, as if it was common knowledge. But here is the crux. We don't have any. Not in our museums, nor in our excavations. It simply does not exist. Except that it does exist. More or less. In 2015, marine archaeologists recovered ingots from a 2,600-year-old shipwreck off the coast of Sicily. Its composition, a curious mixture of copper, zinc, and trace elements very similar to that described in ancient texts. Could it be the last echo of lost technology? And then there is the architecture. Megaliths, underwater structures that should not exist unless someone built them when the sea level was hundreds of meters lower, such as the Bimini Road in the Bahamas, a linear formation of rectangular stones discarded as natural by conventional geology, but suspiciously organized to be a random coincidence, or the underwater formations off the coast of the Japanese island of Yonaguni, with huge terraces and pillars carved into the rock, whose edges are too precise and sharp. The harshest critics call it pareidolia, seeing patterns in chaos. The believers call it proof of what? That we are not the first here, nor the first engineers. And don't even get us started on the maps. The Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513, supposedly based on even older sources, shows Antarctica without ice, a feat, a modern craft, which has only been achieved with satellite images. So where did that information come from? Who mapped the world when it was still wild? Perhaps the most appropriate question is, who had the time? Civilization, as we define it, should not go back that far. Agriculture appeared in 10,000 BC. C, writing around 3,200 C, and the cities soon after. But the Atlantis of Plato breaks this timeline. It suggests a culture capable of political organization, engineering, art, metallurgy, and oceanic war more than 12,000 years ago. There is a term for that, anachronistic capacity, and Atlantis has it in abundance. Now, let's imagine for a second that the account of Plato is not fiction, that some memory of a fallen civilization persisted, transmitted by the survivors or secretly by the priests, that the story was old even for the Egyptians who told it to Solon. What if we were before the fossil remains of humanity's first attempt? Not only a lost city, but a lost world. Of course, that leads us to an uncomfortable question. What ended it? Plato blames divine punishment, corruption, arrogance. A culture that became too powerful, too decadent, and was swept away. Does it sound familiar? It should. It is the oldest trope in the human psyche. Build, fall, repeat. Our myths are full of it. The flood, Babel, Ragnarok, we have been warning ourselves for millennia. And science, the most sober discipline, is beginning to catch up. The Young-Dus impact hypothesis, a controversial idea that suggests that the impact of a comet or meteorite caused a sudden climate change about 12,800 years ago, offers a plausible explanation for the disappearance of Atlantis. Fires, floods, famines, the collapse of civilization in a blink. Atlantis is, therefore, more than just a story. It is a mirror that shows us our fragile modernity. A whisper from the past that tells us we have been here before. That we build towers. That we sail the oceans. That we believed ourselves untouchable and the sea arrived anyway. But Atlantis did not disappear into silence. It resonates in language, in myths, in strange ruins and stranger maps, in the disturbing sensation that invades us when we look at the ocean and wonder what is really down there. Because the scariest thing about Atlantis is not that it might be real, but that it might be normal. And if Atlantis was just a chapter, the next is even stranger. Further east, even deeper, in the waters where the sun sets on forgotten continents and myths not only survive, but multiply. Lemuria, MW, call it what you want, it is a place that should not exist, but that somehow always exists. Leoria Mu. Lemuria is the civilization that escaped science. It began, like so many myths, with a very serious man with a serious hat trying to solve a problem that did not exist. In 1864, zoologist Philip Slater looked at a map and scratched his head. Lemurs. Madagascar had lemurs. India had lemur fossils, but nowhere in between. Neither in Arabia, nor in Africa, nor in the infinite nothingness of the Indian Ocean, only an evolutionary leap across thousands of kilometers of saltwater. So Slater did what any Victorian man of science would do. He invented something and called it a theory. He proposed a sunken continental mass, a lost continent that extended from Madagascar to India. These little balls of fur that jumped from tree to tree once roamed a bridge between worlds, a cradle of life that fell into the sea. And he called it Lemuria, in honor of the lemurs. By all accounts, it was a solid scientific hypothesis for about 5 minutes, because then Darwin appeared, and with him plate tectonics and continental drift, and suddenly the idea of sunken continents went into the trunk of myths, along with phlogiston and the 4 humors. Lemuria was relegated to a small, picturesque footnote in the chaotic adolescence of geology. But something strange happened. Lemuria didn't die. It mutated. At the start of the 20th century, Lemuria had evolved from a lemur highway to something far more powerful and inexplicable. The oifists, like Helena Blavatsky, seized the idea and injected it with spiritual steroids. Lemuria, they claimed, was not just a land bridge. It was a civilization, an ancient one, older than Atlantis. Home to tall, telepathic beings with advanced knowledge and no need for spoken language. A place where humans had not yet solidified into flesh, where we shone like fog, half ether, half thought. The first ones, the originals. They said that Lemuria extended from Madagascar all the way to Easter Island. That it rose and fell before we picked up a chisel. That it not only gave rise to culture, but also consciousness. Madness, no doubt. But here comes the uncomfortable part. We have never fully refuted it. Because buried in this wild tapestry there are threads that pull at the corners of real history. Strange stone ruins on forgotten isles, oral stories transmitted by Polynesian navigators. Giant statues with empty eyes staring into nothingness. Like the Moai of Easter Island, linked not to the recent past, but to something deeper, older, something Lamrian. Let's talk about the Pacific Ocean. It is the largest ocean on Earth. So large, in fact, that we have explored only about 10% of its seabed. That leaves 90% of millions of square kilometers where anything could be hidden, including lost continents. Take, for example, Zealandia, a real submerged continent, the size of India, which hides under New Zealand and its surrounding waters. Geologists officially recognized it in the early 2000s. 80% is underwater, but it was once above sea level, it was connected and it was a home. And if Zealandia exists, why not MW? Mu is the Pacific echo of Lemuria. The name comes from Augustus Laplangian, an eccentric 19th-century archaeologist who claimed to have translated ancient Mayan texts describing a lost continent. He called it MW and said it was the motherland of all ancient civilizations. Atlantis was just its satellite. Egypt and Sumer were pale shadows of the light of Mu. Most scholars rolled their eyes so hard they saw their own brains. But the believers believed so strongly. James Churchward, an English colonel turned mystic, doubled down and claimed he had read some tablets in India that described Mu in great detail, a paradise of crystalline technology and spiritual enlightenment. 10,000 years before our first temple, destroyed by fire and floods. Stop us if this sounds familiar, because it is. This is not just Atlantis, Part 2. It is the refrain of all pre-flood myths, all the memories that humanity cannot forget. A pattern burned into the very bones of culture. And while scientists scoff at the idea of Mu, the Earth does not always follow scientific rules. Take, for example, Nan Madol, an ancient city built on 92 artificial islands off the coast of Pohnpei, in Micronesia. Huge basalt columns weighing up to 50 tons. There are no quarries close by. No tools, no cranes, just black stones piled in a lagoon in patterns so complex that they defied explanation. Local legends say it was built by magic or by giants, or both. What if it was Lemurian? What if that's what's left? Because MW and Lemuria refuse to die. They return again and again in the cracks of our knowledge. In the ruins that we cannot date, in the texts that we cannot translate. In atypical genetic stripes with markers that do not fit anywhere. In cultures with memories of floods. Of islands swallowed by the sea. Of flying ships and stones of fire and golden cities that rose and fell before the stars had a name. And then there is Easter Island. In the middle of the Pacific, thousands of kilometers from any place. Home to enormous stone heads, carved by a people whose origins are still debated. Polynesians, without a doubt, but their oral history speaks of people with long ears. Of navigators from the west, from a place they came, a place that sank. Does it sound familiar to you? And don't forget the Rongo writing and the indecipherable writing system that is only found on Easter Island. A unique writing in total isolation, which hints at a culture with roots much deeper than anyone wants to admit. Now, let's turn off the lights for a second. Let's imagine a world not only before history, but before memory, a planet shaped by slow catastrophes, rising seas, falling skies, comet impacts, tectonic whims. Civilizations that rose too high and fell too hard. The survivors scatter. Stories become songs. Songs become silence. But some things resonate like pyramids found on every continent. Not only in Egypt and Mexico, but also in China, in Bosnia, under the sea off the coast of Japan. Shapes too similar to be a coincidence. Designs too advanced to be tribal accidents. Maybe they didn't copy each other. Maybe they remembered. Lemuria may not have had lemurs. Mu may not have had maps. But together they form a constellation of suspicions, a whisper in the cracks of the timeline. A reminder that the ocean holds secrets. And we are just beginning to knock on the door. The question is not whether they existed. The question is how much of their history are we willing to see? Because if Lemuria and Mu were real, if a vast interconnected civilization once stretched across the Indian and Pacific Oceans, then the map of prehistory is wrong. The timeline is wrong. The narrative is wrong. And it didn't disappear in peace. Legends speak of fire fallen from the sky, of wars with Atlantis, of gods who turned away, of temples swallowed by tsunamis, of the earth itself rising in rebellion. It didn't end in silence, but in screams. And left echoes. In the ruins that we do not understand. In the myths that we discard. In the names that we still whisper, even when we don't believe. Atlantis Leoria Mu. The first empire, the second empire and, somewhere in between, a bridge. But that bridge did not only cross oceans. It crossed time. And now we cross it again to the east, towards the ice and the impossible, towards a place beyond the north wind. A land where the sun never sets. Where people never age. Where death forgets your name. They called her Hyperia. If your mind is spinning already, hit the subscribe button. We are just getting started. This trip is global, and we want to know who is traveling with us. Leave a comment. From where do you follow us? And what time is it there? Let's unravel this mystery together, time zone by time zone. Hyperia. Hyperia was not a place. Not really. It was a rumor. A dream. A cardinal point deformed by myth until it pointed not north, but upwards. Towards something unattainable. A land so far from the known world that it could not be perceived. An eternal summer hidden in the earth's coldest place. In Greek mythology, Hyperia was beyond Boreas, god of the north wind, hence Hyper, beyond. Borea, to the north. But what was beyond the north in antiquity? Nothing. Madness. Death. The edge of the map scribbled with curses and sea serpents. And that's where Hyperia lived, somewhere between heaven and hypothermia. It was perfect, too perfect. The people there did not age or die, and spoke a language unknown to any Greek, but all hearts understood. They worshipped Apollo, god of light and reason. According to legend, he spent winters among them, riding in a chariot pulled by golden swans across skies that never turned gray. It was a paradise without passport. A civilization so pure that it did not need politics, war, or irony. Only music, sun, and a really aggressive real estate portfolio in the Arctic Circle. And that's where things get weird. Because, although Hyperia began as poetry, it refused to stay there. Pythagoras. That triangle guy claimed part of his knowledge came from Hyperia. The same was said by other initiates from ancient schools of mysteries. The philosophers whispered about it. The historians danced around it. And the name kept resurfacing like a continent that had forgotten how to sink. Modern scholars, of course, scoff. They call Hyperia a fantasy, a metaphor, a symptom of ancient sunstroke. But here is the question. Too many cultures say the same thing. The Celts believed in a land beyond the North Sea where dead went to rest. The Norse called it Thule, a place so far north that the sun set but never disappeared. The Vedas spoke of Uttaro, a northern kingdom of peace and eternal light. The Chinese called it Marura, the place of Shambhala, inaccessible on foot, but always just beyond the soul's horizon. Even the Inuit, who live in the Arctic, have legends about a warm land at the pole, surrounded by mountains inhabited by spirits or ancient peoples who disappeared into the ice. So, what are we seeing here? A shared delusion, or a corrupt memory of something real? Let's go all in. Let's talk geology. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, there were actual scientific proposals about a temperate Arctic. Based on old reports of open polar seas, strange plant fossils, and warm-blooded animals found too far north, some scientists believed there could be land, perhaps even habitable land, under the polar ice cap. Today, satellite images and deep core samples reveal that the Arctic wasn't always frozen. In fact, during the Pliocene epoch, about 3 to 5 million years ago, the region was a lush place with forests, rivers, and life. But what happened around 12,000 years ago? That is a turning point. The end of the last glaciation, the most recent and dry, an era of global cataclysms, melting glaciers, rising sea levels, violent climate changes, and, possibly, just possibly, the end of a civilization that lived where no one should have. Could Hyperborea have existed? A pre-glacial civilization built in the Arctic when the Earth had a different tilt, the climate was warmer, and the poles were not a death sentence. It's not as outlandish as it seems. Let's introduce the concept of Earth crust displacement. Popularized by Charles Hapgood and supported by Albert Einstein. The idea suggests that the entire outer layer of Earth can shift in a catastrophic movement. It's not about change along eons, but an overturn, a planetary reset. If such an event were to occur, for example, due to an imbalance in the Earth's axis of rotation, it could displace entire continents overnight. What is tropical could become frozen now. What is fertile could be buried now. A civilization that thrives in a temperate zone of the north could awaken wrapped in glacial ice. And, suddenly, Hyperborea is no myth. It is a victim now. There is another clue hidden within the maps. The map of Orankius Venus, from 1537, shows Antarctica, but not the ice mass we know. A continent with rivers, mountains, and ice-free coasts. That map also places land around the North Pole, islands, waterways, and habitation patterns. How did they know this? Who told that to them? We assume that the ancients did not travel very far. But what if they didn't need to do so? What if the center of the world was not the equator, but the pole itself? In esoteric traditions, Hyperborea becomes more than just geography. It becomes the origin, the cradle of the Aryans, the source of light and wisdom and everything that followed. In the 20th century, dangerous ideas sprouted from that soil and were transformed into nationalist myths. But if we eliminate the ideology, we are left with something even stranger, the recurring belief that the North was not always a wasteland, but a beginning, an axis mundi, a pole of peace. And perhaps the reason we cannot find Hyperborea is because we are looking for it with the wrong instruments. It is not on our maps, it is in our blood. Genetic studies have discovered curious anomalies among northern populations. Certain mitochondrial DNA markers suggest migrations from places that should not exist. HLA groups that do not fit the standard model from Africa. Echoes of an ancient diaspora that does not radiate north, but from it instead. And what about the megaliths here? Yes, they are mainly found near the equator, but their mathematical alignment with the solstices, cardinal points, and star maps point somewhere, often strangely toward the pole. Not the modern pole, but an older one, a previous axis, a place where the sun might have shone differently, where civilizations oriented their temples towards a sky that no longer exists. So here is a speculative bomb. Hyperborea was not just a place at all. It was the first project, a cultural singularity, a society so old that it became legend before the flood. So advanced that it did not need monuments, its memory was transmitted in myths and was so isolated that, when the world changed, it simply disappeared under the cold. But he did not die. He whispered to the Greeks, to the Hindus, to the Nordic, to the Celts and to the Siberian shamans, a shared dream of a northern Eden, a people that never fought, a land that never aged. The human soul's memory of the first place where it felt peace. And if that is true, if Hyperborea existed, what else lies beyond our oblivion? What else waits beneath the ice? Because the further back we go, the less we remember. And the less we remember, the more we mythologize. But myths are not lies. They are fragments. Snapshots of things too big for intact survival. Hyperborea may have disappeared, but the next civilization did not. Not entirely. It did not live above us. It lived below. Not in the sky. Not in the sea, but inside the earth itself. Agartha. Agartha is not a city. It is an investment. A civilization upside down. A mirror of the surface world, only older, deeper, and far stranger. While others sank into the sea or disappeared under ice, Agartha slipped down, into legend, into the earth. The myth of Agartha begins where logic ends, at the planet's center. According to a mixture of esoteric traditions, conspiracy theories, and Tibetan folklore, Agartha is a vast hidden world inside the hollow earth. It is not a cave, nor a bunker, but a full-fledged underground empire that shines with its own sun and is populated by beings who never forgot ancient knowledge. Too much. Let's go back. The idea of a world under our feet is not new. It did not begin with Jules Verne nor with the fringe YouTubers. The Greeks spoke of Hades. The Nordic described Svartalfheim, the kingdom of the underground beings. The Hindu cosmology is full of layers of crazy Patala, underground kingdoms of immense beauty and advanced technology. Buddhists whisper about Shambhala, a hidden realm of enlightened beings, sometimes described as accessible only through secret tunnels under the Himalayas. And then there is Garthi, a heart that beats beneath them all. The name itself emerged from the theosophical texts of the 19th century, particularly those elaborated by Alexandra David Neal. She did not limit herself to speculation. She described, detailed, and mapped. Agartha, she said, was ruled by a sovereign known as the King of the World. His society was hierarchical but benevolent, spiritually evolved, and technologically advanced. Agartha was what humanity could have been if we had not been distracted by power, war, and breakfast cereals. Santa Eva claimed that Agartha was not only real, but that it was conscious, observed, waited, and sent occasional emissaries to the surface when we screwed up too much. Something like a divine technical service. Madness, probably. But this is where things get uncomfortable. Too many clues point in same direction. In 1926, the renowned Russian mystic and painter Nicholas Roerich embarked on an expedition through Central Asia. He claimed to have found monks who confirmed the existence of Agartha, describing it as an underground kingdom connected by tunnels that stretched across continents from Mongolia to the Amazon and Antarctica. He did not say if it existed. He asked why we had forgotten it. And Roerich was not alone. Ferdynand Endowski, a Polish explorer, wrote a book in 1922 titled Beasts, Men, and Gods, Beasts, Men and Gods. In it, he relates stories that were told to him by some Mongolian lamas about an underground kingdom called Agarthi, where the king of the world governs a vast population of enlightened beings. They told him, the Agarthans possessed powerful technologies, including machines that could see events on the other side of the planet. A monk with a face carved in stone said, when the barbarians return, the king will come to the surface. He will not come in peace. It is chilling, but it gets better or worse, depending on your worldview. The Nazis enter the scene. In one of the craziest chapters of real history, Nazi occultists, particularly those of the Ahnenerbe, a research institute founded by Heinrich Himmler, became obsessed with Agartha. They believed in a hollow earth and that there were openings at the poles. Some claimed that the Agarthans were ancestors of the Aryan race and had hidden an ancestral wisdom that could restore the race. In 1938, an expedition went to Tibet seeking the entrance to Agartha. They did not find it, or they did not return. In any case, what they did find was temples with intricate mandalas that looked like maps of a world within another, concentric rings, mountains, suns, a geography that did not correspond to the surface of the earth, but to something else. And then there is science, or at least what poses as it. The hollow earth theory has been discredited by conventional geology. The pressure and heat at the Earth's core are simply too great. But what has not been explained are the persistent anomalies, the strange magnetic fluctuations at the poles, the inexplicable underground echoes, the experiments with deep drilling such as the Kola superdeep drilling, which found disconcerting heat spikes and inexplicable sounds far below the surface. Even modern seismology, the clearest window into the Earth's interior, admits uncertainty. We know what should be there. A liquid outer core, a solid inner core, but we have never seen it or touched it. And the Earth's crust, where all of human history lives, is less than 1% of the planet's volume. It is a lot of space to hide much history. Let's talk about tunnels. All over the world, kilometers of ancient tunnels carved into the rock with techniques that we cannot fully explain extend. In Europe, there are networks of Neolithic tunnels that extend for hundreds of kilometers underground. Without lighting, without soot, only clean corridors that lead to where? In South America, the Incas spoke of the underground roads of Chincana that led to lost cities. The Jesuit missionaries feared them. Modern explorers have disappeared into them. And in the Himalayas, Tibetan monks still speak of Shangri-La, a paradise not above the clouds, but below the peaks, accessible only by invitation and guarded by silence. Could these be outposts, entrance ramps to the Agarthan interstate? Even stranger, some claim that Agartha was not always underground, that it used to be at surface level, that it was pushed under the earth during a cataclysm, perhaps a war, a change of poles, or something worse, a civilization that escaped downwards instead of outwards. Buried not by accident, but by design. What would that mean? It means our myths of giants, of gods, of people from the sky. Maybe they did not come from above. Maybe they came from below. And maybe they still do. Some UFO sightings, those involving ships rising from lakes or disappearing into the mountains, coincide suspiciously well with the concept of Agarthan vehicles, not flying saucers. Underground saucers that operate with a physics that we do not understand or may have simply forgotten. And here comes the good stuff. Agartha might not be alone. The theory goes even further. It suggests the existence of a network of Agarthas. Yes, but also Shambhala, Telos, Urkish, a network of ancient sanctuaries, places where knowledge was preserved after the collapse of surface civilizations. Where memory did not die, it was only hidden. And now, with climate change melting the polar ice caps, with earthquakes displacing faults, with sonar scanners mapping the unthinkable, Agartha is resurfacing, not in form, but in idea. The collective unconscious is cracking, and whispers are heard through those cracks. What if the real secret is this? That we are not the first humans to set foot on this earth. Not the first builders, nor first dreamers. And Agartha is not just some lost city. It is a time capsule, a vault of pre-deluge intelligence, ethics, and memory that stirs deep down. Because the surface was never safe enough. The surface never lasts long. Ah, yes. So, if Agartha is the hidden root, what's the flower? It would be its twin, its mirror image. A land not buried, but well hidden. Not below, but above, yet inaccessible. A kingdom among clouds, guarded by snow. It's time to ascend, to find Shambhala. Shambhala. Far above valleys drowned by smog and ramshackle roofs of human history. In the jagged embrace of the Himalayas, there is a legend older than the mountains that hold it. A place so pure, so serene, that even time forgets to pass. Its name is whispered by monks, buried in scriptures, and pursued by madmen and mystics. Shambhala. The word tastes like wind, cold incense, like an echo of something lost. In Sanskrit it means place of peace or place of silence. But there has never been a more profound silence. At first glance, Shambhala seems a mirage. Just another sacred hallucination of humanity's thirst for paradise. But look again, delve in deeper. Remove the incense, the smoke and the chants, and you will find something chillingly coherent. A civilization that will not die. A realm of advanced knowledge hidden not because it is weak but because it's dangerous. The roots of Shambhala go back to Tibetan Buddhism, where it is described in the Kalachakra Tantra, an ancient, dense text that reads like a mixture of astrophysics, metaphysics, and military prophecy. It speaks of a hidden kingdom in Central Asia, surrounded by mountains and accessible only to the pure of heart, those with the right vibration. Think of a GPS, but for your karma. Shambhala is not just a pretty place, though. It is a city of crystal and emeralds, too. A kingdom ruled by kings who are wise men, scientists who are warriors. The capital, Kalapa, is described with precision. Symmetrical buildings, a gigantic central palace, and towers that hum with an energy that does not come from oil or fire, but from something much older, something that is extracted, not burned. According to the texts, the current ruler, King Rudra Chakrinasant, sitting on a throne, savors enlightenment. He is waiting, watching and preparing now. Because Shambhala is not just a sanctuary, either. It's a clock, too. A doomsday machine precisely tuned by prophecy itself. According to legend, when the world falls into chaos, when barbarism reigns, when corruption poisons the mind and the machine becomes the owner, then the gates of Shambhala will open and Rudra Chakran will emerge with his army. Not metaphorical armies, but literal ones. Battalions of enlightened warriors, mounted on robotic white horses that glow with their own light, wield weapons forged with wisdom and anger. They will not negotiate at all. They will not convert anyone. They will restart it and the world will start again. It sounds intense, almost ridiculous, until you realize how many people have looked. In 1924, the Russian painter and mystic Nicholas Roerich launched an expedition through India, Tibet and Mongolia with the stated goal of finding Shambhala. Funded in part by secret societies and intelligence services, because why not do it? Roerich claimed to have received telepathic messages, seen UFOs, and been guided by monks who insisted that the kingdom was real, only out of sync. Roerich described Shambhala not as a fantasy, but as a parallel reality, a civilization operating at a higher frequency, hidden like a radio station off the dial. It is not seen, it must be tuned. And the most surprising thing is that he wasn't alone. The Nazis, always a warning sign in any story, also joined the search for Shambhala. Himmler's favorite occult project, the Anunnaki, believed that Shambhala and Agartha kept the secrets of Aryan origin and ancestral power. Expeditions were then sent. The documents disappeared. The myths were misrepresented. And, like so many others before them, they returned empty-handed and with a lost look. But traces are still there. The Tibetan texts say that Shambhala can only be found by those destined for it, that it cannot be reached by force, only by being prepared. That its borders are not guarded by soldiers, but by the truth itself. And if your truth is corrupt, if your soul is twisted, you will never find the door. Perhaps that is why we call it a myth. Because the idea of a place that refuses to be found is easier than the idea of a place that chooses who finds it. But this is where Shambhala gets even stranger. The Kalachakra texts describe the kingdom not only spiritually, but also cosmologically, as if it existed in parallel to our world, nested like Russian dolls. Some versions suggest that Shambhala occupies a pure land, a dimension united to ours, but slightly out of phase, neither above nor below through a fourth-dimensional fortress. A civilization behind the veil. And according to prophecy, Shambhala has been watching. Every autumn, every flood, every empire that rises with fanfare and collapses in flames, Shambhala remembers it because it is older than Babylon, older than Atlantis, older than the flood. It was not destroyed. It hid. And maybe that's the point. Atlantis sank. Lemuria sank. Hyperborea froze. Agartha was excavated. But Shambhala? Shambhala waited. So, where is it? The Himalayas are a convenient scapegoat. Enormous, uninhabitable, plagued with valleys, caves, and blank map coordinates. But some say it is not a physical place at all. Some say it moves. A mobile city, a civilization out of step with the world, which is only glimpsed during certain astronomical alignments or when specific mantras are recited at high altitude. A place that rotates through reality like the beam of a lighthouse, revealing itself to the worthy, the mad, and the desperate. And what is even more far-fetched, there are stories, not old, but modern, of travelers who disappeared in the mountains, of pilgrims who return changed, with eyes too calm, healing hands, and an enlightened mind. They don't talk much, but sometimes they smile as if they had seen something too big to express in words. And then there are the tunnels. Once again, the tunnels. Some believe that Shambhala is connected to the Agartha network, a spiritual capital connected by electromagnetic highways under the Earth's crust. That its location is not static, but strategic, located at the confluence of ley lines, magnetic anomalies, and cosmic intersections. That the kingdom not only works thanks to technology, but also to alignment. Call it spiritual Wi-Fi. So, what do we think of all this? Is Shambhala a real place? A psychic echo, an interdimensional refuge? Maybe yes, maybe everything. Because here is the real horror. If Shambhala exists, that demonstrates one thing without doubt. That we were never alone. That someone or something has watched us from the shadows. They are not aliens, nor gods, but human beings like us, only older, wiser and more tired. And now, with our world staggering, with the floods returning, the fires increasing and the very truth becoming a luxury, the prophecy sounds ever louder. The doors creak, the army stirs. Rudra Chakran sharpens his sword not out of malice, but of necessity. And when the doors open, it will not be a sermon. It will be the day of judgment. But before the clouds open and the riders ride, let's take a last look back, at a civilization that does not hide in myth or mysticism, but is written in ancient scriptures. A civilization that waged wars in the sky, that wrote in mathematics, that built cities of flying machines and cosmic engines. You already know its name. The Rama Empire. The Rama Empire. Ancient India. Before Greece dreamed of democracy, before Babylon built its towers, before Egypt carved gods in stone, there was a civilization that spoke with thunder and flew among flames. The Rama Empire. You will not find it in high school textbooks. At best, it is an interpretation in a footnote to Indian mythology, usually dismissed with an intellectual shrug. But open the Mahabharata. Open the Ramayana. They are not fairy tales. They are war chronicles. Technical manuals. Ancient science fiction without fiction. And once you see it, you can't stop seeing it. It was not a civilization of loincloths and cow-worshipping cartoons. It was a world of flying machines, laser weapons, and nuclear war. No exaggeration. Let's start with the texts. The Mahabharata, with more than 200,000 verses, is one of the longest epic poems in existence. It is also one of the scariest. In the Bhagavad Gita, possibly the most serene part of the saga, God reveals with complete naturalness the nature of the universe before encouraging a prince to commit genocide because, cosmically, it does not matter. Elsewhere in the Vanaparva, we read about celestial chariots that can travel great distances in an instant, both in the sky and under sea. Weapons are described that cause blindness, hair loss, and spontaneous combustion. There is a projectile, the Brahmastra, that burns with the power of 1,000 suns and leaves the earth scorched, the rivers poisoned, and the survivors maddened. Does it sound familiar? J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, famously quoted the Gita after the first successful nuclear test. Now I have become death, the destroyer of worlds. But what most people don't know is that he wasn't being poetic. He meant it literally. In a later interview, when asked if that had been the first nuclear explosion in history, he reportedly replied, "Well, yes, in modern history." Modern history. Let's reflect on it, because the clues are everywhere. In Dona Parva, another book of the Mahabharata, a warrior named Ashwatthama unleashes a weapon so lethal that it destroys embryos in the uterus. The earth becomes sterile. The animals die. It does not rain. The skin peels from the survivors in sheets. There are descriptions of shock waves, mushroom clouds, and radioactive side effects. In Sanskrit, 3,000 years ago. And then there are the Vimanas. If you have ever heard the word Vimana, you have probably associated it with ancient aliens thanks to the endless buffet of badly made CGI nonsense from the History Channel. But the Vimanas are not a fringe legend. They are described in multiple Indian texts, from the Vedas to the Mahabharata, as flying chariots made of metal and propelled by mercury or other complex engines. They had vertical takeoff. Some were disc-shaped, others pyramidal. Some even submerged underwater. And they were armed. The descriptions include mirrors for camouflage, rays that could pierce armor, and propulsion systems that altered gravity. In the Samarangana Sutradhara, a 10th-century Sanskrit treatise on engineering and architecture, there is an entire chapter dedicated to the mechanical details of the Vimanas, their construction, their control panels, and their flight protocols. This is not an allegory, but specifications. Now, this is where things get complicated. If they were just stories, we would attribute it to mythology. Everyone likes a good air war, but the physical evidence refuses to be ignored. Let's talk about Mohenjo-Daro. Located in present-day Pakistan, this ancient city was part of the Indus Valley civilization and was an urban marvel of the 3rd millennium BC. See, running water, streets laid out in a grid, multi-story buildings, and radiation. In the 1920s, archaeologists discovered skeletons lying in the streets of Mohenjo-Daro. They were not buried or placed, simply abandoned, as if something huge and sudden had vaporized the population in full movement. Some bodies were found holding hands. One showed signs of being fused to the stone supporting it. Radiation levels were reportedly 50 times higher than normal. The bricks of the city were vitrified, melted, as if by intense heat. There were no volcanoes, no forest fires, just heat. And then there is Jodhpur. In the Rajasthan desert, researchers have found a layer of radioactive ash covering an area of 3 square miles. Geologists could not explain it. There are no nuclear facilities nearby. There is no mining, just residual radiation deep in the earth, right where legends place one of the last battles of the Mahabharata. Do you still think it's just mythology? Let's broaden the perspective. The Rama Empire was not a city. It wasn't even a kingdom. It was a network. A Pan-Asian confederation of technologically and spiritually advanced societies that stretched across present-day India, Pakistan, Nepal, and Tibet, and perhaps beyond, to Southeast Asia, perhaps even China. They were connected by trade, war, religion, and science. They were not governed by politicians, but by rishis with the power to alter reality through spiritual alignment and mastery of technology. Some believe that the rishis were not born that way, but made. That enlightenment in the Rama Empire was not a spiritual goal. It was a requirement to govern. A civilization that did not separate science from soul. And they had enemies. The Asuras, the Nagas, the Rakshasas. Some say they were demons. Others say they were simply another branch of humanity. One that took a different technological path. One that valued power over wisdom. According to some fringe researchers, the war between the Rama and Ashura factions was not metaphorical. It was intercontinental, interdimensional, and intertemporal. A war that ended not with surrender, but with mutual destruction. And yet, vestiges still remain. Temples aligned with constellations that only made sense 10,000 years prior. Huge stone lingams with strange magnetic properties. Plans for flying machines hidden in coded Sanskrit. Vibrations in mantras that coincide with electromagnetic frequencies and a persistent feline, especially in the Himalayan foothills, that remembers something. This is not nostalgia, but drama. Because, what if the Rama Empire never ended? What if it had been suppressed? Some claim that its last survivors retreated underground, to the same tunnel systems that feed Agartha. Others believe that they disappeared completely from our reality, entering a higher dimension where they wait, observe, and guide. And some think that the Rama Empire never really disappeared, that its echoes can be felt in every burst of genius, in every technological leap, in every civilization that suddenly flourished without warning. What if we are not inventing? What if we are remembering? Because the story of Rama is the story of all the ascents and falls, of brilliance poisoned by pride, of civilizations that became so powerful that they forgot that the earth could bleed. And when it did, they vanished. Not in the sea, not in myth, but in memory. And if that is true, if the Rama Empire was real and its wars were nuclear and its knowledge was encoded in mantras and stones, then our modern world is not a miracle. It is a restart. But just when we begin to understand it, to accept that ancient India may have reached heights that we still dream of, another mystery plunges us even deeper. One older than the dynasties. One buried beneath the pyramids. A civilization that never had a name. Only a face. A god. Osiris. The Osirian civilization. Egypt. Before the pharaohs existed. Before the pyramids kissed the clouds, before the Nile had a name, there was something else. It was not Egypt. Not yet. Something older. The Osirian civilization. It is the phantom kingdom under Egypt's golden mask. The bones beneath the sarcophagus. A civilization that is not remembered in the annals, but in allegory. One that never signed its name in stone, but left traces. Someone. Temples. Unaligned, misunderstood technologies, and gods that seem too real. It starts with Osiris. In most accounts, he is a deity, a god of fertility, lord of the dead, the one who taught man agriculture and laws. But if the symbolism is scraped away, something else shines beneath, something human. According to the ancient Egyptian priest Manethiding, who lived in the 3rd century A.C., there were dynasties that ruled before the dynasties, gods, demigods, and spirits of the dead who reigned for tens of thousands of years. Osiris was one of them, a king, a bearer of light, not a mythical figure from parable, but a ruler of flesh and blood. And when you follow Osiris through the labyrinth of Egyptian myth, you realize that he did not rule in fantasy. He reigned in Zepi. The first time that Egyptian cosmology refers to Zept is as a golden age in which the gods walked among men. When civilization appeared fully formed, not through evolution, but through revelation overnight, as if someone flipped a switch. Language, architecture, astronomy, mathematics, all at once. Boom. Zepi was not the beginning. It was the memory of rebirth. And the place most linked to that memory, Abydos. Abydos is one of the oldest sites in Egypt, an ancient necropolis, a city of death. But before housing tombs, it housed something else entirely. The Temple of Seti. Carved on its walls, high above the heads of tourists and skeptics, is the so-called Abydos helicopter. You have seen those photos. A relief panel depicting what looks like a modern helicopter, a submarine, and an airplane crammed into a compact formation, like some aviation meme from 300 years ago. Conventional Egyptologists say these are superimposed, eroded hieroglyphs that have acquired suggestive shapes. But maybe it's not just erosion. Maybe it's a memory. Maybe the priests of Abydos were not drawing what they saw. They were drawing what they remembered. Now, go west to Dendra. There, in the Temple of Hathor, you will find the so-called Dendra light. It is a carved scene depicting a lotus flower from which emerges a serpent enclosed in what looks like a glass bulb. Inside the bulb, a cable, a filament, an energy source sustained by what looks like an insulator. Next to it, a priest handles what appears as a control device. To the untrained eye, it just looks like Egyptian art. To the suspicious mind, it resembles a light bulb. And don't stop there. Let's move on to the big ones now. The pyramids. We are told they were tombs. That 3 pharaohs, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, built them during the 4th dynasty, around 2500 BC. We are told they were built with copper tools and slave labor. We are told this with utter seriousness. But we have never found a mummy inside a pyramid. Not even one. What we have found are anomalies. The Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned almost perfectly with true north, with an accuracy of a degree. Its dimensions encode the golden ratio, pi, and the speed of light if meters are used, something the Egyptians supposedly lacked. It has a height of 1466 m, corresponding to 1/1000th of the distance between Earth and Sunday coincidence. Maybe one, but all of them. The interior ducts align with the belt of Orion and Sirius, the same stars associated with Osiris and Isis. The entire Giza Plateau is a stone map of the sky in 10,500 BC. Wait, what was that? Yes, that date again. 10,500 B.C., the same approximate period as the most recent cataclysm. The same approximate period as Plato's Atlantis. The same period that keeps appearing in myths, disguised as history. What if the pyramids were not built in 2500 BC, but rather restored? What if the dynastic Egyptians did not build them from scratch, but inherited and maintained them, giving them a new name? That is the Osirian theory, that a pre-dynastic civilization, be it called Oiran, Zepian or simply Lost Egypt, built the megalithic core of ancient Egypt using knowledge that we still cannot replicate. Not with copper tools or ramps, nor in 20 years, and certainly not with a population that had barely left the Stone Age. Let's talk about the Osirian located in Abydos. The Osirian is one of the strangest structures in Egypt. Submerged below ground, built with huge granite blocks weighing between 50 and 100 tons each and using a construction style that does not correspond to anything from its supposed era. The official narrative dates it to Seti I, but the construction is so drastically different from his other temples that many suspect it predates dynastic Egypt by millennia. Does that sound familiar? It should, because it is not only the architecture, but also the purpose. According to myth, this is where they buried Osiris. But why bury a god in a megalithic granite box refrigerated by water? Unless Osiris was not a god, unless he was a king and the Osirian was not a tomb. It was a machine. Some fringe researchers believe that it was part of an ancient energy system, a power plant, a resonance chamber, or a hydraulic device. Why? Because of the water, the granite, the arrangement, all of which coincides with the needs to generate polar electrical energy. An energy source, one that could have powered what? Well, let's go back to Dendera, to the light bulbs, to the helicopter hieroglyphs, to the ducts of the pyramids that could have channeled microwave energy to a civilization that did not separate spirituality from science and that used geometry and vibration as tools. Does that sound far-fetched? Then explain why we cannot build the Great Pyramid today with modern cranes. Explain why we do not understand how the stones were cut, moved, and placed with surgical precision. Explain why there is not a single representation of pyramid construction in all Egyptian art. Not one single one. Because maybe they did not build them. Maybe they found them. Like discovering an iPhone in a cave. And that takes us back to Osiris. In myth, he is dismembered and scattered. But in the symbol, it is rebirth. It is resurrection. It is the incarnation of a civilization that died but refused to disappear. The Osirian civilization did not fall. It was transformed into Egypt, into legend, into gods. And if the Osirian builders were real, if they codified their knowledge in stone, buried their machines in temples and allowed themselves to be mythified, then we have been looking at our ancestors and calling them cartoons. But the Osirians are not alone. Another city, even older, was not buried by the sand or by history, but by design. And when it resurfaced, it shattered everything. 7 lost civilizations. And the deeper we go, the darker it gets. If you are still here, it is because you are made for this. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss what is to come. And tell us, from what part of the world you see us and what time it is now. Let's see how far this story really goes through time and space. Göbekli Tepe should never have existed. When the archaeologist Klaus Schmidt discovered the first T-shaped monolith in 1994, the academic world blinked, scratched its head, and checked the date. Because what he had before him, half buried in the hills of southeastern Turkey, was not a primitive site or a circle of random stones. It was architecture, older than anything ever found. Göbekli Tepe, which literally means pot-bellied hill, not only breaks the timeline of civilization. The burning buries the ashes, then sculpts an obelisk on it just to gloat. It dates to around 9600 BC. See, it is 6,000 years earlier than Stonehenge. Agriculture, writing, and the wheel came more than 7,000 after the pyramids of Egypt. And yet, here it stands. These are not the ruins of a tribe. They are not the remains of hunter-gatherers, but a cathedral, a temple, a cosmic machine of stone and symbols. And it was not only built. It was deliberately and carefully buried, as if someone wanted it forgotten. So, what the hell is Göbekli Tepe? Let's begin with what we know. The site consists of at least 20 circular enclosures, of which only a few have been fully excavated. Each circle contains huge T-shaped limestone pillars, some more than 5 meters high and weighing up to 20 tons. The pillars are arranged in pairs facing each other along the circle, like frozen giants in conversation. Some are bare, others carved with images, foxes, snakes, scorpions, vultures, lions, predators, omens, symbols. And then there is Pillar 43, the vulture stone. A scene engraved on the surface that some interpret as an astronomical map, a representation of constellations, a memory of the sky. But this is where things get wild. Some researchers, in particular the team responsible for the article published in 2017 in Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry, suggest that Pillar 43 records a cataclysm. Specifically, the most recent Young-Dus impact hypothesis proposes the impact of a comet around 10,800 BC. That caused a sudden return to Ice Age conditions, which wiped out megafauna and possibly advanced prehistoric societies. In other words, Göbekli Tepe might not be just a temple. It could be a warning, a time capsule left by a civilization that survived something the rest of the world forgot. A message in stone. We were here. We saw the sky burn, and we remember it. Now, hold that thought, because here comes the good stuff. Göbekli Tepe was built by people who were supposedly illiterate, disorganized, and nomadic. The standard model of human development tells us that agriculture came first. Agriculture led to surplus. The surplus led to cities. Cities led to civilization. But Göbekli Tepe puts a twist on the script. Here there was no agriculture, no permanent settlements. However, someone mobilized a massive workforce. Someone extracted and transported stones. Someone had the astronomical and architectural knowledge necessary to align the structures with celestial events. Someone created culture before agriculture. Which means the builders were not primitive. They were something else. What if they weren't emerging from barbarism? What if they were remembering? Rebuilding, recovering from a fall, because something didn't add up. Why build such a huge complex only to bury it? Why hide it under tons of filling, layer by layer, like a tomb? Archaeologists agree that the burial was not the work of erosion or nature. It was intentional, systematic, almost reverent. As if the builders knew it was not for them. As if they were preserving it for a necessary moment. Perhaps for us. And remember, only 5% of the site has been excavated. We are seeing the surface of a civilization's iceberg. Under the ground, kilometers of intact structures may hide the true history, the true technology, the true memory. Some suggest that Göbekli was not alone. Other sites are being discovered throughout Anatolia. Kahantep, Navali, Chi. Sayanu. Similar architecture, similar symbols, similar impact, a network, a system, not isolated, not accidental. A civilization that we never knew existed, one that could have been the basis for everything. Because here is the truly dangerous idea. What if Egypt did not teach the world? What if Mesopotamia did not invent civilization? What if they inherited it? What if the spark came from Göbekli? What if the builders of Göbekli were not inventing religion, art and science, but trying to rebuild them? A cultural black box, a manual for civilization, a cry through time. This is how it is done. This is how you survive. Remember the stars. Remember the beasts. Remember the rhythm of the earth and the breath of the gods. Even the layout of the enclosures, concentric circles that radiate design, seems ritual. Cosmic, not random. They were not camps. They were altars, calendars, maps and perhaps even machines. That's right, machines. Some researchers believe that the arrangement of the pillars, combined with the acoustics of the enclosures, suggests resonant properties that sound rituals were performed. Chants, drums, vibrations that could induce trance or transmit knowledge. Göbekli functioned as a brain, not just as a temple, a device for consciousness. A transmitter? Does it sound crazy to you? Then explain why a people without writing carved abstract symbols such as glyphs, serpentine lines and non-figurative shapes on all the stones. Symbols that do not match any known protocrypt, but seem to communicate something. It is as if they knew that writing would come later, but memory could not. Wait. So what happened? Why bury it? Some think they anticipated the collapse, that the memory of the cataclysm was still fresh. The skies had burned once. They could burn again. So they hid their wisdom not in books, but in the rock, hoping that one day someone would listen. That day may be today. Because with each new discovery, each drone scan, each excavation, Göbekli becomes stronger. It is not a frozen image in time. It's a fuse. Kahantip. If Göbekli opened the history of civilization, Karahantepe made it explode. Located just 35 kilometers southeast of its more famous brother, Kahantip still does not enjoy the same international prominence. But in the silent corridors of archaeology and the fervent forums of alternative history, it is becoming something quite different. The missing piece, the deepest layer, the before and after of Göbekli. Because if Göbekli was an anomaly, Kahantip makes it a pattern. What was previously an isolated wonder is now part of a network that Turkish archaeologists call the TSP region. A constellation of prehistoric sites in southeastern Anatolia that, as a whole, have delayed the chronology of complex society so much that they break it. But Kahantip differs. It is stranger. The roar of the rocks. Discovered in the 1990s, but only excavated in depth since 2019. The site reveals a level of architectural audacity and symbolic obsession that makes Göbekli seem almost modest. While Göbekli offered subtlety, Kahantip shouts its centerpiece, a room of stone penises. Yes, you read that right. Carved into the rock itself, one of the main enclosures of the site contains a circle of T-shaped pillars in an upright position and sand in the center. A series of smooth, unmistakably phallic columns rise from the ground. They are not decorative. They are not random. They are ritual. This is prehistoric architecture in its most blatantly symbolic form. And it gets even stranger. In the same chamber, there is a human face carved into the stone wall. It is not a complete statue, just a head, with wide eyes and an open mouth, emerging like a god being born from stone. It is positioned so that it looks directly at the circle of phallic columns, as if it were witnessing God's judgment on some primordial rite. What does it mean? Nobody knows. And that is the point. Kahantip forces us to face a version of prehistory that is not primitive or accidental, but intentional. These people did not just pile rocks. They carved symbolism into the bedrock. They organized the space with mathematical precision. They created spaces to invoke something, whether gods, ancestors, or the deep architecture of human memory. And they did it 12,000 years ago, before the wheel, before agriculture, before time was recorded. Let that timeline sink in. Conventional archaeology is still clinging to the idea that human civilization began around 3000 BC, with the Sumerians. That before that we were just nomads playing with sticks. But Kahantip stands as a stone middle finger to that narrative, because temples are not carved into hillsides by accident. Monoliths are not aligned with the stars unless the sky has been observed for generations. Geometry is not invoked from a tent. It is done because something is remembered, something older, perhaps something lost. Let's talk about technology, not iPhones. Cognitive technology. The ability to plan, to organize work, to encode meaning in architecture. They are not luxuries of civilization. They are civilization. And Kahantip has all that. In addition, some recent discoveries include an enormous carved teardrop more than 7 m high that rises from a perfectly circular chamber. Underground tunnel systems excavated directly into the limestone. Water channels and basins that suggest not only ritual cleansing, but perhaps even rudimentary plumbing. Human and animal figurines with exaggerated features, eyes, limbs, genitals, that point to a symbolic language or ancestor worship. And here is the most surprising thing. Like Göbekli, Kahantip was deliberately buried. Why? Why dedicate decades, perhaps centuries, to excavating sacred spaces in solid rock only to fill them in? It is not about abandonment, but preservation. These were not societies in decline. They were hiding something. Knowledge, power, or simply memories too dangerous to leave exposed. A theory is gaining strength. Kahantep and the neighboring sites were not just temples. They were the heart of a civilization before the flood. A culture with spiritual practices, astronomical knowledge, and a social organization that rivals what we see thousands of years later in Mesopotamia and Egypt. In other words, these people were not learning, they were remembering. Rebuilding after a catastrophe. Let's get cosmological for a moment. Many characteristics of Kahantep align with celestial phenomena. The enclosures seem to trace solar cycles. Some alignments point to knowledge of lunar eclipses. And those underground chambers literally resonate. Acoustic engineers have observed strange sound properties inside the enclosure's stones, which amplify and echo in a way that suggests the use of vibration in rituals. It is not just about architecture. It is psychoacoustic engineering. A sound temple from the Stone Age. A place where vibration met vibration. Where chants or drums could alter perception, perhaps even induce altered states. Now let's combine that with the phallic symbolism of carved faces and the underground depths. Kahantep was not a city. It was not a fortress. It was a uterus. A place of rebirth, of transformation, a sacred engine designed not to produce food or weapons, but consciousness. And the people who built it came from somewhere. We do not know from where. We do not know how. But they did not come from nowhere. Perhaps they were survivors. Refugees from a submerged world. Lamrians, Atlanteans, engineers of Rama stripped of their vimanas, wandering through Anatolia with nothing more than memories and stones. Perhaps they were locals who inherited the ruins and rebuilt them in their own image and likeness. Or perhaps, just perhaps, they were the origin, the architects of the restart, those who knew that the flood would come and carve their culture in stone, not because they wanted to last forever, but because they knew that nothing else would. Kahane is not the beginning. It is the scar, the mark of a civilization that burned with such intensity that it left shadows we still cannot explain. And those shadows extend to the ground of Sumer, to the whispers of Egypt, to the codified myths of all the peoples who speak of a golden age submerged in darkness. Kahantep is the master key, but it does not unlock the past. It opens the lie that we once evolved linearly from apes to astronauts. The truth is that we have evolved before. The ancient pre-dynastic Sumer. If civilization had a birth certificate, it would probably be written in uniform script and sealed in Sumer. Located in the swampy cradle between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Sumer is the first place where the history of humanity stops whispering and begins to shout: cities, kings, laws, war, commerce, mathematics, beer. Everything is there, engraved in clay and stone. The Sumerians did not simply emerge from the fog of prehistory. They crossed it, bringing fire, language, and bureaucracy to a world still trapped in mud. But, what if they weren't the beginning? What if they were heirs instead? Because beneath the concrete temporal lines of conventional archaeology hides a quieter, stranger truth. The Sumerians tried to tell us themselves. They said that they came from elsewhere. Let's go back now. Textbooks tell us Sumer arose around 4500 BC. With the appearance of the temples of Uruk and Eridu, which stood like stone mushrooms on the swampy plains of southern Mesopotamia. But the Sumerians didn't write about civilization's beginning. They wrote about how they remembered it, according to their own king. They enumerate a strange and chilling document recorded on clay. They were governed before the flood. Not by tribal chiefs or wandering shamans, but by kings in cities for tens of millennia. Let's go slowly now. The list of Sumerian kings begins by clearly stating that, after royalty descended from heaven, it was established in Eridu. That is the first city, the model, the cradle. But here comes the surprising part. Those first rulers did not reign for decades or even centuries. They reigned for millennia instead. One king, Alulim, ruled for 28,800 years. His successor, Alalgar, for 36,000 years. Does it sound ludicrous? Sure, unless it's not, because the list of kings also points to a division in time, before and after the flood. The flood is the turning point. The Great Leveler and the story it tells about cities, kings, and the Great Flood is not unique. It is a reflection of the biblical flood, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the tales of Zasudra, and resonates in all ancient civilizations like thunder in a canyon. So, what was there before the flood? That is the mystery here. That is the madness here. That is the myth here. We believe that the pre-dynastic Sumerians were not primitive. They were part of a world system that disappeared into the water. They did not invent writing to understand things. They invented it to remember what had been lost. The lack of uniformity wasn't born from invention. It was born from mourning instead. Let's talk about gods now. The Sumerian pantheon is crowded indeed. Anu, Enlil, Enki, Inanna, gods of the sky, gods of the storm, gods of water, gods of love and war, and gods of agriculture. But here is the twist now. These were not ethereal concepts at all. They were rulers, physical beings who lived, fought, traveled in flying chariots and enacted laws. Does it sound familiar? It should be so. They are the watchers from the Book of Enoch. The sons of God in Genesis. The beings who descended, interfered, and then abandoned it were buried under the earth. In the Sumerian myth, Enki builds the first city, teaches humans agriculture, and warns of an impending flood. He is both a savior and scientist. And the Anunnaki. Oh, the Anunnaki. Popularized and twisted by fringe theorists. The Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki as beings who came to earth from the sky. No. They are not just vague spiritual concepts. They have roles, jobs, and personal dramas. They dig canals, argue about city governance, and get involved in fights that seem suspiciously like sexual disputes between departments. Sometimes they used weapons that could melt mountains. There is a word for that, technology. Some scholars dismiss this as metaphor. Others point out that we still do not fully understand what the Sumerians knew. Their astronomical knowledge was extraordinary. They knew about planetary movement, lunar cycles, and even the precession, the slow oscillation of Earth's axis, long before the Greeks discovered it. How? Looking at the sky with the naked eye, or because someone told them, someone who remembered. The more you delve, the more unsettling it becomes. Let's take Eridu, the first city, located near present-day Abu Shaheen, as an example. Eridu is considered by archaeologists to be the oldest city in southern Mesopotamia, perhaps in the world. But it didn't start small. The oldest layers of Eridu already show signs of an organized plan, monumental architecture, and a religious hierarchy. No mud huts, no trial and error, just a civilization in full swing. That's not evolution. It is inheritance. The temple of Eridu dedicated to Enki and Abzwaz was rebuilt over 16 times in the same place. Each layer was higher and more complex. Why? To keep the memory. To keep the ritual space alive, to reach something lost. Let's talk about ziggurats. Huge, stepped platforms. Not only religious buildings, but cosmic connectors, microcosms of the universe. And they didn't evolve. They appeared fully formed with mathematical precision and celestial alignment. Many of these structures aligned with specific stars and planets. The Temple of Eridu may have aligned with Sirius, the dog star, sacred in Egyptian mythology and mentioned in almost all ancient sky-oriented cultures. Why align stones with stars? Why observe the sky with such obsession? Because they were not only observing the sky, but waiting for the return of something or the memory of something. And then there's mathematics. The Sumerians developed the base 60 number system that we still use today to measure time and angles. 60 seconds, 60 minutes, 360 degrees. Why 60? Why not 10? Because it's divisible. Because it is modular. Because it is designed. They also knew the so-called proportions of sacred geometry and harmonic structures that would later appear in the Egyptian pyramids, Greek temples, and Gothic cathedrals. So, again, we ask ourselves, did they invent it, or did they remember it? Let's not forget metallurgy, copper tools, bronze casting, and, according to some Mesopotamian texts, access to materials such as el-meshu and nisha, mysterious metals that may have been lost or mistranslated. Even flying machines called jigunu are mentioned, which the gods used to cross the skies. That's not mythology. It is memory and a metaphor. And that brings us back to the flood. All Sumerian cities have a version of the myth. But it is not just a story with morals. It is an inflection point, a restart, a traumatic event codified in each ritual and clay tablet. The survivors Zudra in the Sumerian myth Utnapishtim and Gilgameshir were not only saved, but were instructed to rebuild, teach, and carry forward what was almost lost. So maybe that is what Sumer really was. Not the first civilization, but the first restoration, the first attempt to rise after the fall, to remember, to write it all down before memory faded again. Because the waters always rise, and the towers always fall. But if the story is written in clay, stone, and stars, maybe it can survive. And maybe buried in that memory is a clue. A map to an even older city. A place of light and purity. A place called Dilmun. Dilmun. Dilmun is where gods go to retire. This is how the Sumerians described this place, not as a place of struggle or greatness, but of purity. An oasis of calm. A city so perfect that death itself was forbidden to enter. It was not just paradise. It was a prototype, a control group for creation. But here is a twist. Dilmun was not just myth. It was on the map. Somewhere in the haze of antiquity, this mythical Eden began appearing in commercial records, royal correspondence, and ancient shipping manifests. Copper, pearls, lapis lazuli, destined for and originating from a place called Dilmun. And then it disappeared. Like Eden, like Atlantis, like all perfect things. Let's start where the story usually ends, with the Epic of Gilgamesh. When the semi-divine king of Uruk fails to cheat death, he embarks on a journey across the ocean, through the tunnel of the sun, to find Utnapishtim, the Sumerian Noah who survived the flood and obtained immortality. Where does he find him? In Dilmun. And what is Dilmun? A land where ravens do not croak. Where no old woman says, I am old, where the lion does not kill nor wolf devour. There is no death or decay, only an eternal and resplendent stillness. But this is not just poetry. The Sumerians were not talking about heaven. They described a real place east of their cities, across the Persian Gulf. And archaeologists believe they may have found it on the island of Bahrain. At least, that is the majority theory. But something does not add up, because the Bahrain site known as Qala al-Bahendos shows signs of ancient urbanization, temples, burial mounds, shopping centers, but does not correspond to the scale, scope, or sacred character of the Dilmun described in the Sumerian myth. And then there's antiquity. The Sumerians were writing about Dilmun as early as 3000 BC. BC, but they did not claim to found it. They said that it had always been there, that Enki, god of wisdom, had given life to Dilmun even before rivers flowed. In the Sumerian creation myth, Enki impregnates the land of Dilmun with water, transforming it from lifeless rock into paradise. He builds canals, plants fruit trees, and watches over the birth of humanity. So let's ask the forbidden question. Was Dilmun the origin? Not in a metaphorical, but literal sense. Was it the seat of civilization? The place where memory survived the flood and flowed first towards Sumer, then to Egypt and then to all the other forgotten empires, echoing its design. Let us follow the clues. Dilmun was described as an island, a sacred land where gods met, a center of commerce and transcendence, but also a place with technology. In one myth, the god Enki sends messages to Dilmun using messengers of light. In another, he gets sick and calls his healer priestess, Ninhursag, who diagnoses his ailments organ by organ. Medical science, remote communication, advanced agriculture. Not bad for a culture that's supposed to be prehistoric. And let us not forget the architecture. The temples of Dilmun. The few remains that exist are built on foundations similar to ziggurats, multi-level structures designed not only for rituals, but as cosmic connectors, altars to the sky, stairways to the stars. And then there's the copper. Dilmun was not only a spiritual refuge, but a metallurgical power. The commercial records of the region show a huge influx of copper flowing from Oman through Dilmun and into Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley. It was not small-scale barter. It was industrial. Some scholars believe that the copper trade alone suggests a level of organization rivaling the first dynastic cities. But why copper? Because copper is not only useful, but symbolic. In many ancient traditions, copper is associated with Venus, with the goddess Inanna, with fertility, and rebirth. It conducts energy. It kills bacteria. It shines with a soft, supernatural tone. Perhaps they were not just trading metal. Perhaps they were trading memories, fragments of a science prior to the flood, knowledge encoded in the elements. Because the most persistent rumor about Dilmun is this: it was not built. It was preserved. A backwater of purity in the middle of a shattered world. A palace of memory that remained intact after the flood that drowned Atlantis and erased Rama. A place where the plans were kept, like a seed bank, a sacred vault. And perhaps that is why the Sumerians wrote about it with such reverence. Not as a place to conquer, but one to remember. They did not want to claim it. They wanted to return. And this is where things get strange. Because if Dilmun was really the center of something bigger, a node in a forgotten network, then it is not alone. Similar myths arise everywhere. A bright land to the east, a sacred island where the gods walk. In the Indian tradition, it's Pushkara. In the Persian myth, it's Arianavia. In the Greek tales, they're the Hesperides. Always to the east, always bright, always out of reach. But what if Dilmun was real? What if it was the original sanctuary, the last ember of a previous fire? And if so, where did its people go? Some believe that they became the Akkadians, others the Elamites. But maybe they did not disappear into the empire. Maybe they went into hiding. Maybe they became the architects of Eridu, the priests of the anonymous builders of the ziggurats whose foundations we still cannot explain. Because, like all civilizations before the flood, Dilmun leaves not answers, but echoes, trade routes without origin, legends without end, temples without purpose. But perhaps the most disturbing clue is this. When Gilgamesh arrives in Dilmun in search of immortality, he finds Utnapishtim, survivor of the flood, guardian of the ancient customs. And what does Utnapishtim tell him? You arrived too late. The doors are closed. Memory fades. And that is Dilmun. A memory with doors that do not open. A paradise that was lost not by sin, but by silence. And that silence extends beyond Mesopotamia. It reaches deeper than the Persian Gulf. Because the next city on our trip is not sacred. It is forgotten. It was not the cradle. It was the first. Eridu. In the ruins of Eridu, you can hear the sound of beginnings. Not only the birth of a city or the beginning of civilization, but the first breath of everything we now call history. It doesn't seem like much. Just some ruined mounds in the far south of Iraq, near the edge of the ancient marshes. But under that dust lies a history older than empires, older than myths, even older than memory. This is not where civilization began. It is where it started again. The Sumerians themselves said it. Eridu was the first city, the first temple, the first throne. According to the list of Sumerian kings, after royalty descended from the sky, it was in Eridu. Not in Uruk, nor in Babylonia. Eridu, a name that resonates like thunder on the first clay tablets ever molded by human hands. But it did not emerge with a whisper. It arrived fully formed. Eridu did not grow. It was placed as if someone had spread a divine carpet and said, "Start here." That in itself is already suspicious, but it becomes even stranger. The first levels of Eridu date back to at least 5400 BC. BC, maybe even before. Under its ruined ziggurats and half-erased walls are evidence of 17 layers of temple construction. One on top of the other, built in exactly the same place, each layer more complex, more refined, as if someone was desperately trying to rebuild something they no longer clearly remembered. A memory made of mud bricks, superimposed like traumas. But why rebuild the same temple 17 times? Why not start from scratch? Because they were not trying to innovate. They were trying to remember how to do it right. The central structure was the Ibzu, the temple house of the deep waters of Enki, god of wisdom, magic, and underground rivers. Enki was not just a deity. He was a guardian of secrets. The guardian of me, of the sacred laws that governed everything, from agriculture to architecture and moral codes. And in mythologies, Enki did not write these laws. It rescued them from the flood, from the darkness, from whatever came before. Which raises a terrible question. What kind of knowledge needs rescue? The sacredness of Eridu did not reside in its size or splendor. It was not built to dominate. It was built to preserve, to safeguard something fragile, dangerous, and sacred. Like the scheme of a lost world. Let's talk about the Abzu. In Sumerian cosmology, the Abzu was the primordial sea under the earth, the source of all fresh water and wisdom. It was said that the temple of Enki in Eridu was on the literal entrance to this sea. The rituals celebrated there were not just prayers. They were activations, attempts to connect with the deep. That is not religion. It is an interface. Scholars often interpret the Abzu as a symbol. But, what if it wasn't? What if the temple was built to access something real? An underground water source? Yes, but also a frequency, a resonance, a library stored in stone and vibration. Think about it. Why build 17 temples in the same place? Why keep coming back to this place? Unless something was there, unless they were trying to reactivate it. Now, let's see what came after. The cities that followed, Ur, Lagash, Kish, Nippur, borrowed the model of Eridu. Religious centers surrounded by concentric layers of administrative buildings, markets, and housing. All aligned with the stars. All designed to reflect the cosmic order. But none dared to claim the title of first. Everyone remembered Eridu because Eridu was not just any city. It was a myth in real time. A relic of a civilization that had survived the unthinkable. We have seen this before. In the burial of Göbekli, in the flood myths of Sumer, in Plato's resonant lines of Atlantis, the pattern is always the same. Something big arises. Something terrible happens. The survivors rebuild not from scratch, but from memory. And Eridu is the clearest example we have. A post-cataclysmic capital, a knowledge bunker, a temple built not for the living, but for the future. And what is buried in its layers? Artifacts that shouldn't be there. Tools that suggest metallurgy. Ceramics with iconography that does not match any known local tradition. Symbolism that resonates across all continents. Snakes, circles, stars, the same motifs found in India, Egypt, and Peru. How is it possible that the same symbolic language appears in cultures supposedly separated by thousands of kilometers and millennia? Unless they were not separated, unless they were descendants of something shared, something centralized, something like Eridu. Because the Sumerians did not say that they built civilization. They said they revived it. That royalty descended from the sky again. That the cities had resurged. That knowledge did not return spontaneously, but via inheritance. And if Eridu was the delivery point, what existed before? What catastrophe so completely destroyed the original civilization that only fragments remained? Was it the latest and driest impact? A solar flare? A war? We do not know. But Eridu is scar tissue, a healed wound. The place where survivors put their hands back in clay and said, "Let's begin again." It was not about innovation. It was about saving all that could be. Forgetting what was needed to survive. And perhaps that's why Eridu disturbs. Because it is not only the first city, it's the last memory, the final whisper of a world that died so our own could begin. But Eridu stood not alone. Upriver, another city arose, less sacred, more administrative, but no less mysterious. A city where the gods met in council, where the calendar began, where power took root in the ground of myth. Its name was Nippur. Nippur. There is a silence enduring in the ruins. A pressure in the air, like a ghost's attention. The memory of something observing in Nippur. That silence is not empty. It is waiting. Because Nippur was more than a city. It was the city. Not largest, nor richest, but most sacred. If Eridu was the beginning of memory, Nippur was where that memory became official, where myths were refined into scriptures, where the wild power of origin was put in order, stamped on clay, and sealed with the authority of the gods. But not of all gods. Only of one. Enlil, the lord of the storm and king of heaven and earth, was the one who destined royalty and possessed the tables of destiny, cosmic hard drives that encoded the structure of the universe. In Sumerian mythology, Enlil controlled more than wind and weather. He decided destiny. And his house, the Eker, literally house of the mountain, stood in Nippur's center. Built as a ziggurat, but older than most, the Esher was more than temple. It was a divine audience hall, a meeting place for the gods, a cosmic embassy between the mortal and eternal. And what did they discuss there about human destiny? Let's begin there. Nippur was the seat of celestial law. Before kings could govern anywhere in Mesopotamia, they had to gain recognition by Nippur's priests. Not only politically, but also cosmically. No coronation was valid unless Nippur said so. It was the Vatican and Pentagon combined. And its power came not from armies or gold. It came from memory, because Nippur marked where the calendar was born. The Sumerians, like many ancient cultures, measured time by movements of the sun, moon, and stars. But they did more than just observe. They calculated with terrifying precision. Lunar eclipses, solstices, the precession of the equinoxes, everything was followed, everything was recorded, everything was calibrated. And everything was centered in Nippur. The priests from there were not only spiritual leaders. They were mathematicians, astronomers, timekeepers, lords of time. Let's analyze this. The Sumerian calendar was lunar, of 12 months, adjusted periodically with an intercalated month to keep the seasons aligned. Sounds simple. But it is not. It requires advanced observation, mathematical models, and a deep knowledge of celestial mechanics. The type of system that is built not to discover things, but to preserve what is already known. In other words, the inheritance, once again. And what about the layout? Like other Sumerian cities, Nippur was built around a central ziggurat aligned with the cardinal points and, probably, with the stars. But under the city, excavations have revealed construction levels that precede the known city by thousands of years. Foundations that do not match the rest of the architecture, walls of unknown origin, and fragments of hunting tools, stone tablets that suggest a more advanced culture than what was supposed to be theirs. Some archaeologists speak in hushed tones of a ghost layer, a pre-Sumerian stratum that does not belong there, that should not exist. But it exists because Nippur, like Eridu, was not built only once. It was built again and again, temple over temple, sanctuary over sanctuary, memory over memory, a ziggurat of oblivion. And, nevertheless, something always filters through. Let's talk about the texts. Nippur was the cradle of many Sumerian myths that we know today. It is where the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, was compiled for the first time. Where the list of Sumerian kings was probably edited. Where the myth of Enlil's decision to flood the world was recorded on clay for the first time. A pattern is seen. The flood again. Always the flood. In the myths, Enlil is the one who decides that humanity must be destroyed. He finds us noisy, rebellious, dangerous. And that is why he sends the flood. But it is not just a whim. It is a restart. A forced formatting of the hard drive. And the survivors are not chosen at random. They are selected. In the Genesis of Eridu, another text preserved in Nippur, a character called Ziusidra is warned by Enki, Enlil's more understanding brother. Build a boat, survive, and rebuild. You already know the story. But the key detail is that knowledge was saved, not people, memory, the calendar, the law, the rhythm. That was what mattered. Nippur was not only sacred. It was a server farm, a temple that made backup copies of the cosmic operating system after the flood erased the mainframe. And this is where it gets dark. Because Nippur was also the center of a silent war. Not a war fought with swords, but with symbols. Enlil and Enki, order and chaos, authority and freedom. The myths speak of divine conflicts, exiles, rival temples, a civil war between gods that unfolded in rituals, songs, and architecture. What if that was not fiction? What if it was memory? What if Nippur and Eridu were not only religious centers, but opposing nodes of an ancient philosophical division? Enlil demanded submission. Enki offered knowledge. One flooded the world. The other saved it. And we, his descendants, have been living with the consequences since then. Because the myths codified in Nippur did not fade away. They spread to Akkad, Babylon, Canaan, Egypt, and Greece. They changed their names, they changed their face, but the bones remained. Creation, rebellion, flood, rescue, restart, again and again. And perhaps Nippur wasn't just a city. Perhaps it was a firewall. A safeguard built after the last cataclysm, designed to manage the next one. But whatever it was, it did not last. The memory faded, symbols blurred, and finally, Nippur became ruins. But not before passing the baton to a place on other side of the ocean. A city without name, without king, without writing, only stone, silence, scale. Its name is Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan, pre-classic Mesoamerica. Teotihuacan does not whisper of history. It stands there, imposing, angular, and deadly silent, like a monument sculpted by something that knew too much. Its pyramids rise above the Valley of Mexico like fossilized thunder, vast enough to baffle, precise enough to disturb. Tourists walk the Avenue of the Dead with sunscreen and cameras. But they have no idea, because Teotihuacan is not what it seems. It is not Aztec, Mayan, or Olmec. When the Aztecs arrived in the valley centuries after abandonment, they did not claim it. They called it Teotihuacan, the place where the gods were born. That is not a name given to a suburb. It is reverence. It is terror. Because when they found it, the city was already a skeleton, it was already dead, it was already covered by centuries of moss, myths, and stone silence. No one remembered who had built it. No one remembered why, but everyone agreed it was not the work of humans. Not entirely. Let's look at the figures. At its peak, around the year 100 A.D.C., Teotihuacan was the sixth largest city on Earth. More than 125,000 inhabitants, a sprawling metropolis of rigid geometry and cosmic alignment. The entire city was built on a north-south grid, with the main Avenue of the Dead aligned 155 degrees east of true north, possibly to point directly to the setting of the Pleiades, or perhaps to coincide with the movement of the sun on a specific date, or perhaps to do something that we still do not understand. That is the pattern, right? We do not understand it. Neither the layout, nor the chronology, nor the builders, because they have completely disappeared. There are no names, no signatures, no lists of kings or cuneiform, only enigmas and ruins. Let's start with the pyramids. The Pyramid of the Sun is 66 meters high and was once covered by bright white plaster that reflected the sun like a signal. Below is a natural cave, modified and mysterious. Some think it represents the underworld. Others think it is a uterus, a tunnel to lost technology, a relic of something older. There is even a central well under the pyramid. A vertical passage drilled deep into the rock. Why? No one knows, but it suggests a vertical movement of energy, resonance, an axis. The Pyramid of the Moon, at the northern end of the Avenue of the Dead, is equally strange. It imitates the shape of the mountain Cerro Gordo behind, deliberately, symbolically, and cosmically. The pyramid was not simply built upon the earth. It was built to reflect the earth, or perhaps what preceded it. Then there is the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent, also known as the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. This structure is the most richly decorated of the three main pyramids. Its facade is covered with dozens of stylized serpent heads and intricate iconography, much of which seems to refer to water, fire, and movement. Underneath it, archaeologists discovered a tunnel. A tunnel full of mercury. Yes, mercury. Pools of mercury, sealed chambers, liquid metal shining in darkness. Mercury is toxic, dangerous, but also symbolic. It was believed to be a portal between worlds. In ancient China and India, mercury was associated with immortality. In alchemy, it was a sacred element. In Teotihuacan, we don't know because the texts have disappeared or never existed. What we have is the architecture, and that is where the screams are. The whole city is coded, not only aesthetically, but mathematically and astronomically. Many researchers have pointed out that the layout of Teotihuacan reflects the solar system. The distances between the pyramids coincide with the relative distances between planets. The Pyramid of the Sun is in the center. The Pyramid of the Moon, displaced, reflects the position of Earth. The whole city becomes a model not only of the sky, but also of orbital mechanics. In stone, 2,000 years ago, without telescopes or computers. Unless that wasn't when it was built. Let's delve deeper, because some believe the dating is wrong. That Teotihuacan was built long before the year 100 A.D.C. That it predates the Toltecs, the Zapotecs, and even the Olmecs. That it could go back to the year 2000 B.C., or even further back. The problem is the same as always. The lack of organic material. Radiocarbon dating of the structures is almost impossible. So we date the surroundings based on ceramics, nearby burials, or artistic styles. But what if the core was already old when the first potter appeared? What if they inherited it? And here is the key, the central structures are megalithic. They are not made of adobe or brick, but of stone, fitted, angular, designed to last. The kind of durability sought when you want to preserve knowledge, power, or memory. Some theorists believe that Teotihuacan was not a city at all, but a machine, a resonant engine, a geoelectric node in a forgotten network of planetary harmonics. They point to the use of mica, a rare mineral with insulating properties, found in buried chambers, magnetic anomalies, tunnels under the pyramids, and alignment with solar zenith points. They suggest that it was not built to be lived in. What was it built for? A transmitter, a beacon, a factory? We don't know, but we feel it. Walk down the Avenue of the Dead at sunset, and the shadows get too long. Stand on top of the Pyramid of the Sun at noon, and the wind doesn't just blow, it hums. There is something in the stone, in the silence. Something that is retained. The Aztecs believed that it was where the gods were born. Maybe that's true. Or maybe it's where the gods died, leaving their tools. Because Teotihuacan does not answer any questions. It raises them. It turns upside down the carefully elaborated chronology of New World archaeology. It says that someone was here before. Someone who knew more than they should have. Someone who did not need writing because they had geometry. They had stone. And if that is true, what was before that? Who taught these builders? Where did they go? Some believe that they moved south, scattered like seeds in the wind, and that their next incarnation was not in the highlands, but in the desert, where the oldest city in America sleeps under layers of sand, memories, and bones. It is called Carol Soup, Peru. It looks like nothing, just stones dragged by the wind and terraces bleached by the sun in a dry piece of coastal desert 200 kilometers north of Lima. There are no great pyramids, no gold idols, no war gods who look angrily from the temple walls. But there is the key. Carol does not shout, it whispers. And in that whisper lies the oldest city in America. Welcome to Carol Soup. It dates back to at least 2600 BC. And it may possibly be even older than that. Carol is older than the pyramids of Egypt, the Indus Valley, and Babylon. It stands like a mirage from the Soup Valley, a perfectly preserved urban complex that rewrites the history of the New World every time we dare to look closer. But what makes Carol truly terrifying is not just its age. It is what it lacks. There are no weapons, no walls, no tombs full of elite warriors there. It was not a conquered city at all. It was an ordered city. And that makes it even more suspect. Because Carol does not fit the model of textbooks, in which agriculture leads to hierarchy, hierarchy leads to conflict, and conflict builds walls and empires. But Carol skipped all of that. It did not have any of the defensive characteristics that we expect from the first civilizations. Instead, it had pyramids, squares, sunken amphitheaters, and irrigation canals. Not one or two, but dozens, arranged with mathematical precision and aligned with the stars. A city that did not evolve, but appeared, planned, measured, and remembered. Let's begin with the scale. The Carol complex covers more than 150 acres and includes at least 6 huge pyramidal structures. The largest, known as the Great Pyramid, rises more than 90 feet high. Built not with rough stone, but with fine terraces of earth and ash. The pyramid was designed to withstand any earthquakes. Yes, designed well. Think about that. A Stone Age society without metallurgy or known wheels, creating earthquake-resistant architecture in a high seismic risk zone. That is not improvisation at all. That is pure engineering. But where did that knowledge even come from? The builders of Carol left no written record behind. However, they left ropes, or rather quipus, knotted cords that the Incas used 1,000 years later. Here, in Carol, we find their ancestors, perhaps their teachers, knotted cords buried next to children, kept in ceremonial spaces and hung on altars. Communication without writing, calculation without numbers. Data encoded in threads, like a Stone Age hard drive. And then there is music. Flutes made from condor bones. Bugles made from deer and llama bones. Not hidden in houses or scattered in landfills, but placed with reverence in temples and on ceremonial platforms. It was not a people who were learning how to build a city. It was a people who already knew, and their knowledge went beyond sound. It reached for the stars. The layout of the city of Carol seems astronomically aligned. Certain structures mark the solstices and the equinoxes. Others point to celestial events still being deciphered. The sunken circular plazas were probably designed as ceremonial amphitheaters to observe the sky and make sounds. Now ask yourself, who needs a cosmic calendar? A farmer, a priest, or a survivor? Because, what if Carol is not the beginning? What if it's the middle? What if its calm, its absence of war, is not innocence, but a memory? What if these people remembered what came before, what was lost, and decided to never repeat it? Because the silence in Carol is not peaceful. It is loaded. There are no idols, no written doctrine, no god-kings who dominate the masses, only shared space, open plazas, and pyramids, not for burials, but for meetings. That is not religion. It is ritual memory. And here is the part that nobody talks about. The people of Carol disappeared. Not in war, nor in a fire. They simply left. The city was abandoned around the year 1800 BC. Its structures were slowly devoured by time and sand. There are no signs of famine, no evidence of plagues, only an absence. Like a decision, like the last note of a song that only a few knew how to listen. But fragments remained. Its influence extends throughout the Andes, reaching later civilizations such as the Chavan, the Machica, and the Incas, but always diminished, always as an echo of something greater. Because Caral did not fade away. It was dismantled. Dismantled, not to be destroyed, but to be remembered. And its builders. They did not start from scratch. They arrived with geometry in their bones, with instruments in hand, with the sky in their hearts, and perhaps with stories of a flood they never wanted to repeat. Because that is the common thread of all civilizations before the flood. Atlantis, Lemuria, Rama, Eridu, Teotihuacan, Caral. They did not emerge from nothing. They emerged from ashes. They did not build to begin, but to begin again. And Caral, in its disturbing silence, could be the loudest cry of all. But on the other side of the sea, on the other side of the world, another legend stirs. In the tropical jungles of Southeast Asia and India, a kingdom governed not by men, but by snakes, and not in memory, but in myth. The Naga civilization, India, Southeast Asia. They slip between myth and memory, scriptures and speculation. They are never fully visible, they are only hinted at in spirals and curves, in the undulations of temple carvings and in the fear whispered in ancient texts. The Nagas, half human, half snakes, deities, demons, saviors, destructors. Their civilization, if it can be called that, does not leave behind cities in the conventional sense. There are no ziggurats, stone colossi, or roads, only portals, gateways to another world. One underground, underwater, or somewhere else entirely different. But there is something that keeps surfacing. The Nagas were not just characters in stories. They ruled. They built. And somewhere, beneath the sediment of symbolic language, lies the backbone of a lost civilization, an empire before the flood, erased not by time, but by intention. Let's start with the Vedas and the Puranas, ancient Indian texts written in Sanskrit that describe not only gods and heroes, but planetary systems, technologies, and wars. The Nagas appear again and again. Guardians of treasure, lords of the underworld Patala, possessors of immense wisdom and terrifying power. But it's not just literature. It is geography. Many regions of India and Southeast Asia still retain their name. Nagaland, Nagpur, Nagarjunakonda, and more. It is not a poetic coincidence, but a legacy, echoes of a real presence. Names passed down by descendants who only half understood who or what those names originally described. In the Hindu tradition, the Nagas are deeply intertwined with cosmic cycles. They are not just snake people. They are guardians of knowledge, of the sacred. And in some versions, they are the builders of cities in the depths of the earth, cities with bright walls, endless tunnels, and technologies so advanced they're confused with magic. Let's go there. To Patala. According to Hindu cosmology, Patala is one of the 7 underworlds that lies beneath the earth. But unlike the hells of Western myths, Patala is not a realm of fire or punishment. It is beautiful, lush, illuminated by its own sun, with flowing rivers, palaces of crystal and metal, towers that glow with a light that does not come from the sky. And who lives there? The Nagas, described in detail in the Bhagavata Purana. They are sophisticated beings. Some are humanoids with serpentine features. Others are full-bodied snakes with immense intelligence. They live in highly organized societies, with kings, queens, warriors, and scholars. Its capital, Bhagavati, is described as a place of impossible architecture and interdimensional portals. So, again, the question is, myth or memory? Because all the cultures of India have a myth about a people of snakes. In Cambodia and Laos, the Nagas are considered ancestors. In Thailand, they are protectors of the temples. In Java and Bali, their image is carved into almost every ancient shrine. And in all these myths, serpentine beings are not evil. They are older. Let's move on to archaeology. In the Angkor Wat complex, in Cambodia, the most emblematic element is not only the imposing spire of the temple, but the causeways protected by Naga balustrades. Railings with seven-headed snakes that guide visitors to the sacred core. The symbolism is dense, but the execution, engineering. Giant sandstone snakes carved with perfect symmetry intertwined in the very infrastructure of the temple. Why snakes? Why not lions, elephants, or deified ancestors? Because the Nagas were not just symbols. They were remembered. And what did they guard? Something ancient, more ancient than the Angkor, older than Hinduism. Let's move on to Indian temples. In southern India, especially in Tamil Nadu and Kerala, there are underground sanctuaries dedicated to snakes, called Sarpakavu, which are venerated with a kind of nervous reverence, not for prosperity or peace, but for containment. The belief is not that the Nagas need us. It is that they allow us to live here, that they contain forces under the earth, forces that they understand and we do not. Which brings us to the next topic. The Nagas did not live only underground. They came from somewhere. In many texts, they arrive in flying palaces. Vimanas. Yes, again with the flying machines. Some Vimanas are described as burning discs, others as palaces that could shrink or grow at will. The Nagas had access to them or built them. In some versions of the Mahabharata, a Naga prince named Takshaka commands fleets of aircraft. He leads invasions. He decimates cities. He disappears. Not because he has been defeated, but because he retreats to the depths, back to earth, back to memory. And that is the most disturbing part. The idea that the Nagas did not die. They withdrew. Their civilization did not collapse. It retreated like a snake waiting to strike again. Even more chilling, watching us fail again. Some modern interpretations suggest that the Nagas represent an ancient racial branch of early humans or a non-human intelligence that took refuge underground before the last cataclysm. They did not try to rebuild on the surface. They did not spread their survival. They simply waited, preserved their technology, preserved their genome, preserved their knowledge. Not to share it, but to inherit it when we disappeared. That is the thread that unites them to Agartha, to Shambhala, to the underground sanctuaries buried under all the continents. Because maybe the Nagas were not an isolated case. Maybe they were the survivors. Maybe all those pre-flood civilizations we have talked about, Atlantis, Lemuria, Rama, Eridu, Kerala, did not disappear. They separated. Some built stones. Others built codes. Others built myths. But the Nagas built below. And now, in the cracks of the earth and in the tectonic sighs and in the underground hums, perhaps they can still be heard, not calling, just listening, waiting. And if so, maybe the next civilization will not arise from us. Maybe it will slide up. And that brings us to an even stranger story. One in which life and death are not opposites. Where the guardian of the underworld is not a demon, but a judge. His name is Yama, and his kingdom could be the first civilization judged. The kingdom of Yama in Hindu mythology. Before Abraham, before Osiris, before the concept of hell was codified in the scriptures or in stone, there existed Yama, the god of death, but not the reaper, but the king. In Hindu mythology, Yama is not just a soul collector. He is a sovereign, judge, and administrator of cosmic order. And his kingdom, Yamauka, or Narakis, is not a kingdom of eternal punishment, but a kind of spiritual processing center, a metaphysical court where the dead are judged and assigned their destiny. But here's the strange thing. It is not only a spiritual concept. Yama's kingdom is described geographically. And what's described doesn't seem like a dream. It looks like a civilization that existed before death. Let's walk the line between theology and archaeology. In Vedic texts, specifically the Rigveda and Garuda Purana, Yama is described as the first mortal to die, the first being to cross the threshold. But he doesn't just die. He rules. He becomes the guide, monarch of a kingdom beyond human perception. And that kingdom is structured. Cities, palaces, roads, halls, judges, registrars, devices that scan karma, rivers dissolving sin. It is not a landscape of clouds. It is not ethereal nonsense. It is a bureaucracy. A civilization made of consequences. But, what if it wasn't just metaphor? What if Yama's kingdom wasn't invented to scare children or comfort mourners? What if it was remembered from before the flood? From before memory became myth? Because every time we scratch the surface of the Yama legend, we find echoes of something real. Let's talk about its geography. Yama's kingdom is said to be south of Earth, always south. In Hindu cosmology, the south is the direction of death. Funerals are held facing south. Offerings to ancestors are made facing south. It is not arbitrary. It is a code, but also specific. The city of Yama, called Sayamana, is described in some texts as located in the depths of the earth, surrounded by walls of iron and fire. Souls reach it through the Vitarani, a river red as blood, full of filth and knives. But once crossed, they enter a city of perfect order, neither paradise nor torment. Order. Think about it. Underground, fortified, technologically advanced, full of complex moral and energetic systems. That's not hell. It is an archive. A processing center. Or perhaps, if you squint, a data vault. And who works there? They are not demons. They are beings, employees of karma, scribes, executioners, surgeons of the soul. They use tools, scanners, scales, all described in terrifying detail. And what does Yama sit on? On a throne of judgment, surrounded by Chitragupta, the divine guardian of records who keeps track of every thought, word, and action of the living. That's not fantasy. It is infrastructure. Then, where does this come from? How did a prehistoric culture imagine a kingdom of death so structured, so judicial, so disturbingly familiar? Unless they didn't imagine it. Unless they remembered it. Some scholars and mystics argue that the kingdom of Yama was not a place one went to after death, but a place that existed. That in some prehistoric epoch, long before written history, there existed a city or society so obsessed with morality and so technologically advanced that it developed a literal system for processing souls. Not metaphorically, but literally. A soul-sorting machine, an engine of judgment. And after the flood, after the fires, after the great amnesia, all that remained were the fragments, the stories, the symbols, and Yama. Let's talk about technology. The Vedas describe the Tabila device of Chitragupta, in which the actions of all human beings are recorded in real time, not after death, but during life. Does it sound like divine magic or surveillance? Remote data tracking, biometric registration. It raises a terrifying question. What if someone is keeping a record? What if a long time ago a civilization built the technology to monitor the soul, to measure behavior, thoughts and intentions, and then, when the world caught fire, that technology was buried, mythified and called Yamaloka? The kingdom did not die. It only changed frequency, because Yama is not feared. He is respected. He is called Dharma Ray Jaking, the one of righteousness. And some traditions suggest that he returns periodically to recalibrate, restart, to judge not only individuals, but eras. And maybe it's our turn. Because the kingdom of Yama is not just a place where the dead go. It is a model, a plan for what comes after the collapse. A system designed to survive memory, to guide what survives. Because if you want to rebuild the world after a flood, a fire, or a fall, you don't start with stones. You start with ethics. And if you can automate that, you're not building a city. You are building civilization 20. And maybe that's what Yama is. And maybe that's what we're standing on. A system that keeps working even if we can't see the code. But if the kingdom of Yama was a reset engine, a soul server, a moral mainframe, maybe it wasn't the only one. Because on the other side of the world, a different myth speaks of 7 bright, silent, lost cities, buried not under sand or ice, but under greed. The 7 cities of Cibola. The 7 cities of Cibola. Somewhere in the deserts of the American Southwest, under the dunes, the cliffs, or perhaps a veil of time, it is said that there are 7 cities. Cities of gold, cities of light, cities of secrets. They shine in the heat haze of legend, passed down by conquistadors and native oral traditions alike. To European ears, they sounded like greed. The fraternal twin of El Dorado, a myth made of metal and mirages. But what if gold was never literal? What if Cibola had nothing to do with riches? What if it was about the remains? Because the story of the 7 cities of Cibola does not begin with Spanish greed. It begins with loss. Let's go back. The first references to these cities do not come from explorers, but from survivors. Moorish slaves, shipwrecked monks and native guides tell stories that do not speak of treasures, but of otherness. Cities where the architecture did not fit with the land, where the lights shone at night, where the tools moved without hands, where the knowledge was kept under lock and key in the memory. When Francisco Vázquez de Coronado heard these stories in the 1540s, they had transformed into dreams of greed for gold. He followed them north from Mexico to what is now New Mexico and Arizona, hoping to find palaces. He found towns, adobe houses, stone cities, and went mad from disappointment. But, what if he wasn't entirely wrong? What if what he saw were descendants of something older? Not cities of gold, but ghost towns, ruins built on ruins. The names changed, the purposes forgotten. But the bones, the design, remained, because the indigenous oral traditions do not speak of 7 cities of greed. They speak of 7 cities of origin. The Zuni, the Hopi, and the Navajo have stories about their emergence from the depths of the earth, from distant lands, from cities that no longer exist in this world, but that once did. They speak of portals of Cyprus, of stellar beings who taught them agriculture, mathematics, and law. Of a time before the flood, the fire, us. And those 7 cities were not just shelters. They were archives. Let's go into topographical details. Some researchers have observed that several ancient settlements in the southwestern United States, such as the Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde and the Bandelier structures, share strange similarities, solar alignment, acoustic properties, and underground chambers known as kivas, which were used for rituals and possibly for communication. What kind of communication? We do not know. But the Hopi say that the messenger spirit Kakina Sensei emerged from those places and brought messages from the stars. The Kakinas are often dismissed as dancers disguised in seasonal ceremonies. But in the Hopi tradition, they are hybrids, teachers, observers. Their headdresses are not decorative. They are functional. Their stories do not end with metaphors. They begin in memory. And in that memory, the world has already ended before. The Hopi speak not of one, but of 4 previous worlds, each destroyed by imbalance. Fire, ice, floods, civilizations that arose, fell, and restarted, but without being completely erased. A few always survive, a few remember and head north, to the cities. 7 of them, cities that keep the plane. Not only of survival, but also of reconstruction. Let's move on to architecture now. The great houses of the Chaco Canyon were not makeshift shelters. They were multi-story complexes astronomically aligned and built with precisely cut sandstone blocks. The wood was brought from more than 110 kilometers away. The rooms were aligned with the solstices and equinoxes. The windows were designed to capture specific celestial events. It was not about trial and error. It was about instruction. And under the surface, tunnels, some filled in, others still open, leading to where? Nobody knows. But the locals whisper that they are entrances to something deeper. To cities that have not been seen since the last sun. And the gold. Ah, yes, the gold. Maybe there was something. But maybe gold was never metal. Maybe it was knowledge. The kind of knowledge that is buried when the world burns. The kind of knowledge that does not survive conquest. The type only remembered in lullabies, dances, and ruins that do not make much sense. Like the Sipu, a hole in the ground of each Ka. It is said to be the portal through which the ancestors emerged. But maybe it was not from the earth. Maybe it was from below the flood line. From the cities that existed before. 7 of them, each with a part of the code, the pattern, the structure of a civilization not yet remembered, but never completely lost. And maybe, just maybe, Cibola was not a destination. It was a system, a backup plan, a distributed vault for a dying era. 7 nodes, 7 frequencies, 7 opportunities to do it right next time. And here we are again, on the verge of the next fall. We keep looking for gold. We keep ignoring the message. Because the 7 cities did not treasure treasures. They kept the memory. And what happens when that memory unlocks? Maybe we are not yet destined to know. But while Cibola faded into the dust of history, another city was dragged into the sea. A real city, visible today. A city linked to the gods, war, and immersion. Dvarka. The submerged cities of Dvarka, India. There is a sound that the ocean makes when it swallows memories. It is not violent or theatrical, just an ancient silence, like a secret sealed. That is the sound of the west coast of India, where divers went in search of coral reefs and found cities. Not coral, not rock, cities. Welcome to Dwarka, door between history and myth, between the scriptures and stone. According to Indian mythology, Dwara was the city of Krishna. Not only a spiritual teacher or divine figure, but a king, a strategist, a warrior, a man who ruled a city so vast and splendid that its palaces shone with gems and its streets resonated with chariots pulled by white horses and artificial elephants. And then it disappeared, submerged by the sea, not as punishment, but as prophecy. For thousands of years, Dwara only lived in sacred texts. The Mahabharata, the Bhagavata, the Purana, the Haramsa. In these epics it was described with surreal details. A city with 900,000 palaces, wide avenues, drawbridges, and a bustling port with maritime trade. Skeptics shrugged. Myth. Allegory. Political fanfiction by ancient priests. And then, in 2001, the Arabian Sea cleared its throat. Using sonar and marine archaeology tools, the National Institute of Oceanic Technology, NIAD, discovered huge geometric structures under the Gulf of Kum, almost 40 meters below the surface, kilometers from the coast. The amazement was followed by silence, because what they found broke the script. Regular formations, cobbled streets, rectangular structures, pillars. A network that extended along 9 kilometers, not random debris. Urban planning. Carbon dating of a piece of wood extracted from the site revealed an age of approximately 7,500 C. Let that sink in. 7,500 years before Christ, before Egypt, before Sumer, before what we call civilization. If that dating is correct and remains controversial, it makes the underwater city of Dvarka the oldest known urban structure on Earth. But even if it is not so old, even if the dating is wrong by a few millennia, the implications are still catastrophic because we continue to see a sunken city where there should not be one. We continue contemplating geometry where only chaos was expected there. And that geometry coincides word by word with the descriptions of the scriptures. The Mahabharata describes Dwara as built by Vishwakarma, architect of the gods. An impossibly beautiful city erected in a single day. A city that Krishna later abandoned, knowing that it was doomed to sink. And so it was. While the sea roared, Krishna went into the forest and was never seen again. It may be a myth, but we now have sonars. Now we have submersibles. And the ocean does not lie. Let's talk about construction. Marine archaeologists found structures made of basalt and other stones that do not belong on the seabed. Rectilinear formations that do not occur naturally. Stone blocks stacked in patterns. what seem like stairs. Foundations, not natural designs. They also found artifacts, ceramics, fragments, beads, fossilized bones, and revealing signs of fire. Fire at the bottom of the ocean. What burns underwater? Only memories, only myths, only cities that should not exist. But Dvarka did exist. And not only in one place. Multiple sites off the coast of Gujarat, the current Dwara and Bet Dvarka, revealed submerged temples, walls, and docks. Structures aligned with the sun and stars. Structures that fit with ancient knowledge that are not found in engineering manuals, but in Sanskrit. And here comes the most surprising thing. The modern city of Dwara was built upon some ruins. Those ruins were built on other, older ruins. And those who know this know that it is not just a city. It is a palimpsest, a layered memory, a rebirth machine. Each layer built with reverence for the previous one. And the sea waits because Dwara is not alone. The coasts of India are full of clues. Pumpuhar in Tamil Nadu, Mahabalipuram near Chennai, and Morosites, where the earth gives way to myth and the myth gives way to stone, and all of them sunk as if the sea knew what we are not prepared to remember. Let's ask ourselves a question that no one dares ask. What if the flood myths all describe the same event? Atlantis, Lemuria, Eridu, Dvarka. What if the reason why all these civilizations end in the same way, fire, flood, fall, is because that's how it happened? What if Dvarka is not just a city? What if it is not proof of divine magic, but of pre-flood engineering, of knowledge older than the Himalayas, of cultures so in tune with the cycles of the earth that they built in sync with it, still lost? And what about Krishna? If you remove the blue skin of divinity, what remains? A leader, a strategist, a war general, a man who fought in battles not only with arrows and chariots, but with something else. In the Mahabharata, Krishna helps deploy weapons that sound disturbingly modern. Missiles, rays of light, projectiles that cause massive destruction. Does it sound familiar? We have heard these echoes in the empire of Rama. We have seen the burned land in Mohenjo-daro. So maybe Krishna was not a god. Maybe he was a remnant. A descendant of a civilization that clung to order in the last days before the sea claimed everything. And when he saw that the end was near, he left. Let us allow it to fall. Because perhaps some things are destined to remain buried, not to punish, but to preserve us. Dvarka sank, but it did not die out. Wait. And in its silence, there is a warning. One that we have heard before, one that we ignore. Because the ocean has a rule. Everything returns. But in the Pacific, on the other side of the world, another mystery stirs beneath the waves. Not in Sanskrit. In silence. Yonaguni. Yonaguni Monument, Japan. The sea does not forget. It softens. It silences. But it never forgets. Off the coast of the westernmost island of Japan, Yonaguni. There is a monument so enormous, so precise and so inexplicable that it forced the ocean to begin to whisper. Some say it is a natural formation, a trick of currents and geology. Others swear that it is proof of an ancient civilization lost beneath the waves. A city, a sanctuary, a warning. What everyone agrees on is that it does not belong here. Discovered in 1986 by a local diver looking for hammerhead sharks, the Yonaguni Monument is a submerged stone structure located about 25 m below the East China Sea surface. It measures more than 150 m long and 40 m wide, almost half the size of a soccer field. Its sides are terraced with right angles. Its surfaces are flat and smooth, and its lines are too clean. Imagine a ziggurat. Now drown it. Now try to explain why it has ramps, platforms, and stairs. This is not natural erosion. It is not how we are used to thinking about erosion. The main feature is a stepped pyramid-shaped mass, smooth plains intersecting at right angles, vertical walls rising with unnatural precision, and terraces that look artificial. Some resemble the type of carved stone architecture seen in Sacsayhuaman, in Peru, or in Ollantaytambo, in Egypt. But this is underwater, and very deep. Too deep for a city that should have been built during the last few thousand years. The sea level here has not been so low since the end of the last glaciation. Around 10,000 B.C. And there it is again. That date, the red line of pre-deluge memory. What if Yonaguni was not built before the flood? What if it was built during it to survive, to record, to resist it? Let's discuss the characteristics. Apart from the main structure, divers have found other anomalies. What look like a large arch, roads, canals, walls. A slab even appears to be a huge megalith with carved eyes, nose, and mouth, worn by time, but unmistakable. If these elements had been found on land, no one would question their artificiality. But submerged in salt water, skeptics rely on geology. They describe it as chance, a happy accident of tectonics and erosion. But the Ministry of Education of Japan included it in its list of cultural assets for being something built by nature. Something we had forgotten. Professor Masaki Kimura, marine geologist, a nonconformist and villain for skeptics, enters the scene. Kimura has spent decades studying Yonaguni, measuring its angles, mapping its terraces and photographing its inscriptions. He believes that it is a submerged, complex city, possibly part of a much larger continental mass that now lies beneath the East China Sea, extending from Taiwan to Okinawa. And according to Kimura, the structures could be up to 10,000 years old, older than any known culture in East Asia, older than the Jaman ceramics found in Japan, older than Sumer, Egypt, or Stonehenge. So, who built it? Nobody knows. No Japanese culture of that period is known to be capable of such construction. There are no writings, no tools, no myths, at least none that have survived. Except in the folklore of Okinawa and Ryukyu, there are rumors about a lost people of the sea, builders who came from the east, who erected great stone places and disappeared when the waters rose. The legends do not name them, but they remember them. Fragments, ghosts, the same pattern that we have seen in every corner of the world. A civilization that built in stone, that aligned itself with the stars, that saw the sea rise and tried to resist. What if Yonaguni was its last temple, its last message? Because the monument is not only huge. It is oriented, aligned with magnetic north, structured in proportions reflecting the golden ratio. And there are other submerged formations nearby. Other clues as if Yonaguni was the visible tip of something deeper, something vast, something erased. Let's talk about tectonics. Japan is one of the most seismic regions on Earth. Earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes. The Pacific Ring of Fire does not play. What if the civilization that built Yonaguni knew it? What if they designed it not to last forever, but to be an eternal sign? A monument so huge that, even if the earth fell apart, it would still stand. And now it lies in silence. But silence is not the same as absence. The sea observes, the stones resist, and in its humid corridors, the past whispers of nameless engineers of cities that contemplated the stars from under the waves of memory, codified not with ink, but with angles. Because Yonaguni may be the final point of a sentence forgotten long ago. Civilization did not begin once, it began again and again. Each time with less memory, less time, less mercy. And yet, each time someone left a mark, not a story, but a structure. The question now is not whether a civilization existed before the flood. The question is which one. Because from Yonaguni to Egypt, from Peru to India, the echoes are not coincidence. They are crafty. A map drawn not with lines, but with ruins. And if you follow that map, it takes you to a line of stone that extends across the Atlantic to an underwater road that leads to the Bahamas and the legend called Bimini. Bimini Road, Bahamas. Just below the turquoise glow of the Atlantic, off the coast of North Bimini in the Bahamas, is a formation that should not exist. It extends in an almost perfect line across the seabed, forming huge rectangular blocks of limestone. Each one intertwined like the bones of a fossilized snake that disappears into the blue. Locals call it Bimini Road. Skeptics call it geology, but the sea does not lie. It only buries. Discovered in 1968, Bimini Road immediately unleashed a storm. To the untrained eye, it looks like an old road, a breakwater, a wall, something built. The stones are evenly cut. They fit together very well. They follow a strange winding path, almost as if they were guiding the way to something out of sight. And then there's the moment when they appeared. In 1938, 3 decades before the discovery, the psychic Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, claimed that the remains of Atlantis would rise near the Bahamas in 1968 or 1969. Madness, coincidence, or something more disturbing? Because Bimini is not only strange, but wrong. It does not belong here. Let's talk geology. The official version says that the blocks are beach rock, natural sediments formed by the cementation of sand and shell fragments over time. In theory, slabs like these can break into regular shapes due to natural fracturing. In theory, but this is what keeps researchers like Dr. Greg Little awake at night. Greg Little and others. The stones are leveled, not randomly placed, but leveled. Many have a flat top and right angles. Some are deliberately stacked. Underwater sonar reveals that the formation continues beneath the sand. It's not just a road. It is a structure. Part of something much larger, mostly buried, possibly ancient, and perhaps the last whisper of a submerged world. Which brings us to Atlantis. Leaving aside Cayce's predictions, Bimini has long been linked to Atlantis theories. Plato described Atlantis as located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we today call the Strait of Gibraltar, placing it somewhere in the Atlantic. Orthodox historians roll their eyes, but the clues accumulate like stones. The Bimini Road is located on the edge of the Great Bahama Bank, a huge underwater plateau with geological characteristics that defy any easy explanation. The platform extends for hundreds of kilometers with submerged ridges, cliffs, and what appear to be unnatural cuts. If it was ever above water, it would have been during the last glacial period. The Bimini Road could be the vestige of a coastal city, a dike, a dock, or the path to a temple. And when the waters rose, they didn't just flood the city. They erased the context. And that is the real problem of Bimini. It's not just about what you see. It's about what is missing. There are no inscriptions, no artifacts, no tools, just stone. But the stone does not lie. The stone remembers. The stone remains. And here is a key. Limestone does not preserve human artifacts. Well, the organic material decomposes. The clay disintegrates. The wood disappears. But architecture is eternal. That is what Bimini gives us. And what it hides. Let's talk alignment. Some researchers claim that Bimini Road points directly toward the island of Andros, where other anomalous underwater formations have been sighted. Others say that it is part of a wider network that connects submerged sites along the Atlantic, Cuba, the Azores, the Canaries, a lost map, a civilization not located but distributed. A network in Bimini. It is the peripheral node, the warning buoy. Because the more we learn about the Earth's ocean levels during the last glaciation, the clearer it becomes. Vast expanses of what is now seabed were once coastal lands. In fact, if sea level dropped only 100 m, entire cities would reappear. And what would we see? Stone, roads, silence. Exactly what we see at Bimini. Let's ask ourselves a dangerous question. What if the Bimini Road was not built by humans? Not the modern ones, nor the Sumerians, nor the Egyptians, but the precursors, the engineers before the flood, the culture whose remains are scattered throughout time like static. Those who built before Babel, before Atlantis, before we forgot the meaning of stars. Perhaps Bimini was not part of any city. Perhaps it was a door, a threshold, the last exit before the flood. And when the waters came, they did not destroy it. They sealed it like an archive marked "Do not open." But the tide is changing. The sea level rises again. The sonars are better. The divers are more daring and the stones speak slowly, line by line. Because Bimini is not alone. It is part of a submerged Rosetta Stone that connects cultures that should never have touched. And if we decipher it, we will not only find Atlantis. We will find what was before Atlantis. The supercontinent. The real. The world under the waves that never had a name until now. Zealandia. The lost continent of Zealandia. It was always there, lurking beneath the South Pacific, hidden in plain sight. Too big to be a myth, but too submerged to matter until now. Zealandia is not a theory. It is a continent. A real continent, verified and geologically recognized. And the moment scientists confirmed its existence in 2017, a very uncomfortable question arose. How does an entire continent disappear from history? Without legends, without maps, without memory, only ocean and silence. With an extension of almost 5 million square kilometers, Zealandia is about 2/3 the size of Australia. 94% is submerged. What is above sea level today? Only the mountain peaks of its highest ridges. New Zealand, New Caledonia, and some scattered islands. But once it was land, forests, rivers, possibly cities, possibly something else. Because here is the problem with Zealandia. It should not be forgotten. It is too big, too significant. If it had ever been inhabited, the archaeological footprint would be enormous. And yet, history does not mention it. There are no legends of Polynesia, no rumors of Asia, no echoes in the mythologies of the sea, unless it was remembered differently. Let's talk about Lamria, a continental mass that was hypothesized in the Indian and Pacific Oceans, invented in the 19th century to explain the spread of lemurs across distant islands. But it soon ceased to be a simple zoological place to become a lost continent, a cradle of civilization, a place of ancestral wisdom now submerged. Science discarded it because it was not falsifiable. But then 2017 arrived. Zealandia did not literally emerge, but it did geologically, confirming itself as Earth's eighth continent, separated from the ancient supercontinent Gondwana tens of millions of years ago. But the chronology becomes confusing. When did it submerge? Some scientists admit that part of it may have been above water as recently as 10,000 years ago. There it is again. 10,000 C. The dividing line of history, the red thread that runs through Atlantis, Bekleet, Dwara, Bimini. And now through Zealandia. The question is no longer whether there was land. It is whether there was life. Let's look at the clues. New Zealand is home to some of the oldest and most unique species on Earth. Flightless birds, ancient trees, reptiles that have not changed in hundreds of millions of years. It is a biological time capsule. And time capsules are not formed in isolation. They survive in isolation, which means they once had company, which means that the rest of Zealandia was not just jungle. It was home to something that then disappeared. Swallowed not only by water, but by oblivion. Because when we talk about forgotten civilizations, we often imagine the erasure of records, buildings, or tools. But the most dangerous erasure is the one that eliminates context. What if Zealandia was Lemuria or part of it? A continent that once stretched from India to Easter Island, a network of cultures connected not by an empire, but by water, an aquatic, maritime and pan-Pacific civilization. That would explain the megaliths of Nan Madol, the stone heads of Rapanui, the Obsidian roads buried under the Solomon Sea, the oral traditions of the Maori, the Hawaiians and the Samoans, who speak of ancestors who came from vast lands that sank beneath the waves. Zealandia may not be Lemuria, but it is proof. Proof that the world is older, stranger and more disrupted than we have been allowed to admit. Because the Pacific not only hides islands, it hides time. And in that submerged time hides a possibility that no one wants to face. That the history of humanity is not a line, it is a loop. Civilization does not arise once and fall once, but is cyclical. And in each cycle, a few remember, a few record warnings in stone, a few disappear beneath the surface, geographically or culturally, and await the next loop, the next fall. So what happened to Zealandia? Maybe nothing. Maybe it was just trees, birds and volcanoes. Or maybe it was a civilization so different from ours that we don't even recognize its traces. Because not all knowledge is technological. Part is environmental, spatial, oceanic. The knowledge of the tides, of the currents, of the migrations of the fish and of the trajectories of the stars, and the resonance of the stone under the feet. What if the civilization of Zealandia was not obsessed with building upwards, but outwards? What if its monuments were made of water, sound, rituals? What if the clues were still there, buried under the coral, encoded in engravings too worn to be read, reflected in mythologies dismissed as children's stories? Because if Zealandia really was once above water, and if someone lived there, and if they knew that the flood was coming, was going to arrive, they would not build a city. They would build a message, a system of whispers that would spread throughout the ocean. A cultural submarine that we are beginning to hear now. The beating of a drowned heart. A pattern buried not in books, but in the bones of continents. Tartessos, ancient Spain. The history of Tartessos begins where most stories end, on the edge of the map, beyond the Pillars of Hercules. On the murky border between the Mediterranean civilization and the wild and stormy Atlantic, between what the Greeks knew and what they feared. Tartessos was a name whispered by travelers, coveted by kings, and dismissed by historians. It was called a kingdom, port, city-state, land of unimaginable riches. A place where silver ran through the land like blood through veins. Where rivers shone with metal and rulers dined on gold. And then it disappeared without war, warning, or a trace. This is not a legend. It is a documented absence. An absence always has shape. Let's go back. The first references to Tartessos come from the 9th century BC. BC. When Greek and Phoenician merchants began to venture west from the Mediterranean to the Iberian Peninsula, what they found left them stunned. A people already there, organized, and rich. They did not discover Tartessos. They found it. And what they found was unlike what they expected in the West. This town had writing, a form of semi-linear script that remains undeciphered to this day. They had metallurgy and advanced smelting of silver, tin, and gold. They had agriculture, irrigation, architecture, and trade routes. Many. Tartessos became a crucial node in a Mediterranean trade network from Mesopotamia to the British Isles. They were Bronze Age intermediaries who traded in metals and mysteries. It is said that its capital, never located with certainty, was near the mouth of the Guadalquivir River, where Seville and Cadiz are today. A fertile estuary with a natural port, surrounded by mineral-rich hills. And then, silence. Around the 6th century BC. Tartessos disappears from the historical record. Not gradually, but abruptly. There are no written accounts of conquests, nor records of migrations, nor narratives of collapses, it simply disappeared. Even Herodotus, who wrote centuries later, admits that the city was great in its day and then ceased to be. Which leads to a question no one wants to ask. What if Tartessos was not simply forgotten? What if it was erased? Let's talk geography. The Andalusian coast is an unstable hybrid of river delta, marshes, and quicksand. The perfect environment for a city to slowly sink, not in a dramatic tsunami, but in silent entropy. Year after year, the sea goes in. The earth sinks. Salt water seeps into ground. Agriculture collapses. Trade is reduced. Does it sound familiar? It should, because it is very similar to Plato's description of Atlantis. Circular islands, concentric canals, rich in metals, a naval power beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we call the Strait of Gibraltar. Plato described Atlantis around the year 360 BC. But many believe that he did not invent everything. He borrowed from older sources, from half-forgotten truths. And in that memory, Tartessos fits like a piece of a puzzle, too advanced for its context, too rich to be real, too silent suddenly. Let's speculate. Some marginal researchers and a few serious ones believe Tartessos was not only a local Iberian culture, but the westernmost outpost of a pan-Atlantic network. A maritime civilization with roots that stretched across the ocean, from the Azores to the Canary Islands, from Bimini to Caribbean. A culture prior to classical antiquity that arose from the remains of an even older world, a world before the flood, a civilization that was not rebuilt from scratch, but re-established lost trade routes, lost knowledge, lost rhythms. And Tartessos, a terminal, a relay point, a memory center, which leads us to the artifacts. Few remain, some tombs, inscriptions, and gold. Much gold. Not only jewels, but language. The treasure of Corumbello, discovered near Seville in the 1950s, is a collection of gold plates, bracelets, and pectorals whose craftsmanship suggests not only wealth but symbolic sophistication. The symbols engraved on them have not been deciphered yet. They are not Phoenician or Iberian, they are something else, something older. And the architecture disappeared, but not without leaving whispers. Satellite images of Dinana National Park, a marshy estuary, reveal circular depressions that match Plato's description of Atlantis, rings of land and water. Researchers have found ancient canal systems buried under mud. Roads, foundations, cities that do not appear in history books because they were built before history resumed. And that is the terrifying idea that Tartessos was Atlantis or, at least, its shadow, its echo, a civilization reborn after the flood, built on the bones of another that preceded it. It is not a myth or a metaphor. It is memory. And memory, as we have seen, has layers. Tartessos may not have been the original, but it was a carrier, a recipient, a city that knew too much, lasted too long, and disappeared too cleanly. Because perhaps it was allowed to disappear. Maybe someone ensured it was. And now it is a name in a dusty text. A ghost on a forgotten map. A signal buried under a Spanish swamp. And if we ever decipher that signal, if we ever see Tartessos as it really was, not only will history be rewritten. It will reveal that history has been rewritten again and again. But the next city on our journey did not simply disappear. It was never meant to be found. It is not simply lost. It is hidden. The Aztecs called it their place of origin. They called it Aztlan. Aztlan, Mesoamerica. There are places that disappear in silence and places that disappear in songs. Aztlan is one of the latter. It resonates in the memory of the Aztecs, not as a warning or a political fiction, but as an originating myth so rich in details and so imbued with symbolic geography that it seems more like an encrypted story than a mythology. Aztlan was the beginning, not of the world, but of a people. The Mexica, part of what we now call the Aztec Empire, traced their lineage to this mysterious northern land. It was a paradise, an island city, a place of resplendent lakes, white stone, and 7 Chicamostoc caverns from which 7 tribes emerged. And then they left, wandered, conquered, became gods, kings, and legends. But they never forgot. Aztlan was not a moral tale. It was their home. And if it sounds familiar to you, an advanced city on an island abandoned after a major turning point, then yes, you have heard it before. Atlantis, Lemuria, Tartessos, Dvarka, Aztlan fits the mold. But what if it's not just coincidence? What if Aztlan were real? What if it were not just a cultural metaphor for Mexican identity, but a cultural memory of a civilization that preceded them by millennia? Let's start with what the codices tell us. In the Bini Codex, the Oban Codex, and the Azcatitlan Codex, we see representations of the Mexica migration from Aztlan to the Valley of Mexico. Stylized maps painted with striking glyphs and vivid inks show an island city surrounded by water. Birds fly above. A mountain was crossing the sky. From the caves came people carrying banners, musical instruments, and a kmac, a beam in the shape of a serpent that represented wisdom, law, and continuity. None of this seems accidental. They are icons of origin. And the strange thing is its specificity. Alan isn't vague. It is a place described in a coherent way, an island with temples, an urban layout, a location on the water and, most importantly, to the north. All the legends about the Aztec migration agree that Alan was north of their final homeland, north of Tenochtitlan. Some said it was days away, others centuries away, but all agreed that it had been lost or abandoned. Or sealed. Let's talk geography. Over the centuries, scholars, archaeologists, and speculative historians have tried to locate Olin. Theories range from Utah to New Mexico, from northern Mexico to Baja California. Some point to the Four Corners region, others to Lake Chapala. A few fringe researchers even point to the lost coasts of the Pacific Northwest. But maybe they're all wrong. Maybe the confusion is the crux of it. Because what if Alan did not exist on a map? What if it were an echo? The shadow of a civilization before the flood, remembered not in stone, but in migration, in movement. Let's be symbolic. The 7 caves of Alan Chickasaw, which are said to be the point of origin of 7 tribes. Each cave is a gateway, each tribe a lineage. Some scholars have suggested that they represent cultural divisions, but others believe something stranger. That the 7 caves represent underground cities or, better yet, survival bunkers. Yes, you heard that right. Alan may not have been a city. It may have been a refuge, a place to hide during the cataclysm that shattered the last world. The Aztecs believed that we live in the 5th sun, the 5th incarnation of human civilization. Each era before ours ended in fire, flood, wind, or earthquake. Each era was restarted. Each era required survivors. And where would survivors hide? In caves, in underground temples, in Alan. This theory isn't new. It is present in all indigenous cosmologies of America. The hopeful story of emerging from the chaos after the Third World was destroyed. The Mayans speak of Zebo Beth, the underworld that housed the ancestors until it was safe to resurface. And the Incas believed that their founders emerged from a cave called Tampataccoa, analogous to the 7 caves of Chico Mosto. It is the same story again. A pre-human world, before the flood, a great oblivion, a resurgence, and a migration. So maybe Alan wasn't just a homeland. Maybe it was the last node of a dying network, a place where knowledge was preserved, a fragment of something older, Rama, Lemuria, or some nameless precursor. Let's talk about language. The name Olin means place of the Huron, but it can also be interpreted as place of whiteness, a land of bright stones, a luminous city, an echo of the descriptions we have seen in Atlantis, in Dvarka, in Plato's dream, and who lived there. The Aztec Chichimea, a hybrid people, neither gods nor mortals, but transmitters, messengers. They did not build Olin. They abandoned it. And they took their symbols with them. The feathered serpent, the obsidian mirror, the layout of the triple temple, the belief that history moves in cycles. Because maybe Olin was not a singular place, but a cultural hard drive, a recipient, a mythological wrapping around a real place that once housed civilization's DNA prior to the flood. And that DNA still beats in the Aztec temples, in the Mayan glyphs, and in the Andean masonry. The same architectural footprints, same celestial alignments, same serpentine iconography. It is not about diffusionism. It is remembrance. A shared trauma transmitted through ruins and rituals. And Alan. That was the refuge, the hidden library, an outpost of memory. We are barely starting to remember because, under the stories, under the earth, under the systematic erasure of colonization, the earth still remembers and caves still resonate. And if we ever find Alan, if we stand on his island, under his horseshoe and in his caves, it will not only be an archaeological discovery. It will be a reunion with the parts of ourselves that we left behind when waters rose. And if Alan was the point of departure of a civilization that was fleeing its own flood, then the next land on our map could have been its destiny. A kingdom of commerce and myrrh. A partner of Egypto. A place that was always known but never found. The land of Punt. The land of Punt. The ancient Egypto. In the annals of Egyptian history, the land of Punt is more than just a commercial partner. It is a memory, a brilliant mirage in the confines of known geography, a place of incense trees, exotic animals, and gods that walked like men. The Egyptians called it Tanator, the land of the god. Not the land of a god, but of the god. It was never conquered, never governed, only visited, and always with reverence. Which poses a disturbing question: what if Punt was not some distant kingdom? What if it was a vestige, a preserved fragment of a civilization prior to the flood that Egypto itself envied? Let's start with the tests. Punt is more famous for appearing in records during the reign of the pharaoh Hatshepsut, around 1470 c. Her expedition, known for being one of the first documented trips in the history of humanity, was immortalized in reliefs in her funerary temple of Dar el-Bahai. These carvings are not vague. They show large cedar wood ships loaded with merchandise, gold, ivory, ebony, baboons, giraffes, panther skins, and trees. Entire trees uprooted and transported to Egypto. Incense and myrrh, precious and rare, given to temples and embalming chambers. But the carvings also show something stranger. Buildings on stilts. Queen Adi of Punt represented with an unusual size and exaggerated features, men with strange clothes, and a lush and rich land that looked nothing like arid Egypto. This was not only commerce. It was a pilgrimage. But here is the problem. Despite having been recorded on multiple occasions throughout 1,000 years of Egyptian history, no one knows where Punt was. Think about it well. One of the most advanced civilizations of the ancient world maintained a lasting relationship with a foreign land to which it sent ships to bring merchandise and even referred to it as sacred. And, nevertheless, at present, we cannot find it. Some scholars say that it was in Somalia. Others say that in Eritrea. Others affirm that in Yemen, vaguely pointing to the south or to the east. But none can explain the reverence. No one can explain why the Egyptians granted Punt a divine status, unless it was older, much older. Unless it was already old when Egypto was born. Let's delve deeper. Punt is not only mentioned by Hatshepsut. Mentuhotep III launched expeditions there around 1950 BCE. C. The pharaoh Sahar also did so around 2500 BCE. C. And each time, the tone is the same. We are not going to trade. We are going to remember. Because in the myth of Osiris, possibly the most important myth of Egyptian religion, there is a moment in which Osiris, the god-king, travels to a distant sacred land. Some scholars argue that this land of the gods was Punt. In other words, Osiris was from Punt. Now, let's add this. In Egyptian cosmology, the cycle of civilization begins with Zept, a mythical golden age in which the gods walked the earth and taught humanity everything it needed to know. Where did this Zept occur? Nobody knows. But some texts hint that it was not in Egypt. It was somewhere else, beyond the horizon. In a land of abundance, a land on the other side of the sea. Punt. What if Egypt did not invent itself? What if it inherited its sacred geometry, its solar alignments, and the codes of its temples? What if all that came from Punt? What if Punt did not simply disappear? What if it sank? Because the coast of the Horn of Africa is one of the most geologically unstable regions in the world. Tectonic trenches, subduction zones, sudden drops in elevation. Entire landmasses could disappear and leave no trace under the moving seabed. Ask Bimini. Ask Dvarka. Ask Zealandia. Ask Atlantis. What if Punt was a surviving node of a global civilization before the flood? An outpost that Egypt found and kept secret? Did it trade with it, worship it, and when it finally disappeared, whether due to rising sea levels, an internal collapse, or simply isolating itself, did Egypt only record its silence and continue to call it the land of the gods? Let's go into detail. The flora and fauna imported from Punt, incense, myrrh, giraffes, baboons, are not native to Egypt. But here is the question. The trees thrived when they were replanted in Egyptian soil. They adapted perfectly, suggesting a similar climate, a similar altitude, a shared ecosystem. But where is that ecosystem now? Some parts of southern Arabia barely fit. But if the sea level is traced back to more recent times, a different picture emerges. Much of the Red Sea and the Arabian Peninsula would have looked radically different. Islands now submerged, mountain ranges now erased. Could Punt have been one of them? Could it have been a bastion and an archive of something much older than Egypt? A place that remembered what Egypt forgot to ask. Because all cultures, when asked where they come from, point backwards. But Egypt always pointed to Punt. Always to the south, always to the sea. And perhaps they were not only aiming for a source of wealth. Perhaps they were aiming at the origin, at a memory so sacred that it could only be preserved in rituals, at knowledge so dangerous it could only be exchanged for incense. And when the last ship returned, when the last queen died, when the last temple was sealed, Egypt turned inward. It became a museum of itself because Punt had disappeared. But its blood was still running through the veins of Egypt, through its pyramids, its calendars, its stars. And perhaps if we find Punt, not the ports, but the core, we will find more than trade routes, we will find the next chapter of the story that began with a flood. But before crossing that sea, we must descend more deeply into the first storm, the first civilization, the first fall. The biblical world before Noah, the antediluvian land, the world that was judged and erased. The antediluvian, biblical world. There is a silence in Genesis that seems deliberate. Between the moment when Adam is expelled from Eden and the moment when Noah boards the ark, the Bible quickly passes through entire centuries, millennia, even speaking in vague genealogies and whispers, as if trying to cover a wound. What little it says is soaked in unease. Long-lived patriarchs, cities built in a single generation, sons of God who descend to earth, and giants who walk among men. The world before the flood, the antediluvian world, is not described in detail. It is intentionally buried, casually, as if remembering it too clearly would invite it back. But the fragments that remain do not suggest a primitive society, but a terribly advanced one. A world not of mud huts and stone spears, but of engineering, empires, and catastrophes. Let's start with Genesis 6, one of the strangest and densest chapters in the Bible. It introduces the Nephilim, the giants, or the fallen. It tells us that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and married any they chose. Their descendants were described as heroes of old, men of renown. The wording here is not accidental. It is not about gods, nor about angels, nor about demons. They are intermediaries, the result of something ancient and forbidden. And immediately afterwards, God decides to destroy the world. Not for disobedience, but because all the thoughts of the human heart were always evil. This is not the story of a single sinful act. It is about the collapse of a civilization that, according to all sources, should not have existed at that time, since the genealogies indicate that life expectancy was 700, 800, or 900 years. Men who walked with God, men who built cities, invented instruments, and forged tools of bronze and iron before the flood, thousands of years before the rise of Sumer or Egypt. So, where are their ruins? Where is their rubble? Where are their craters? Perhaps the flood was not just a punishment. Perhaps it was a cover-up. Let's go to Enoch. The Book of Enoch, which in its origins was part of the biblical canon of early Christianity and is still venerated in the Ethiopian tradition, offers us a broader perspective. It speaks of the Watchers, angels who descended to earth and taught humanity forbidden knowledge, astrology, forging weapons, makeup, sorcery, knowledge of plants. Its leader, Azel, is condemned for teaching humanity to make swords, knives, shields, and armor. This is not a metaphor. This is a transfer of technology. And in the account of Enoch, the flood is not a random act of divine wrath. It is a deliberate act of containment, a security mechanism. The earth is corrupted not by sin, but by information, by progress, by an acceleration of knowledge that unbalances the balance. Does it sound familiar? It should, because the antediluvian world reflects all the myths of all the lost civilizations. A corrupted golden age, a fall, a flood. Let's examine the timeline. In Genesis 5, 10 generations pass from Adam to Noah. If we take it literally, this places the flood around 2300 BC. But the ages are symbolic, and the text itself does not worry about dates. It worries about distance. The antediluvian world is not prehistory. It is pre-memory. A time so foreign that to remember it becomes dangerous. And yet, vestiges still persist. All over the world, flood myths are repeated like a broken record. In Mesopotamia, Utnapishtim builds an ark. In India, Manu is warned by a talking fish. In Mesoamerica, the gods drown humanity in a flood and remodel it from a labyrinth. In Australia, the rainbow serpent sends waters over the earth to cleanse it of corruption. In every corner of the earth, the story is same. A civilization falls, and the water rises. The survivors are always few, always chosen, always with the mission to carry something forward. Which brings us back to Noah. His ark is not a ship. It is a vault, a container of memories, a DNA repository, a cultural reset switch, because the antediluvian world was not erased. It was archived. What survives is not only life, but the code, the instructions for civilization compressed into myths, embedded in rituals, scattered across continents. And this is where it gets darker. The Bible says that even after the flood, the Nephilim continued to exist. There were giants on the earth in those days and afterward. How? Why? Because the flood did not end history. It started a new version of it. A reboot with fragments of the ancient world hidden in its matrix. Perhaps that is why we find advanced knowledge embedded in cultures after the flood. The precise mathematics of Egypt, the astronomical alignments of Sumeria, the sudden appearance of agriculture and architecture in Eurasia and America. They are not coincidences. They are echoes. The antediluvian world was not erased. It was renamed. And its architects, perhaps they did not drown. Perhaps they hid underground or went to another world or remained in memory, waiting for the next awakening. Because the antediluvian flood is not the last. It is the model, a systemic event, a cyclical collapse. And all civilizations since then have been a pale imitation of the one we lost. The one that built not only towers, but timelines. The one that destroyed itself with too much power, too much pride, and too much knowledge. And perhaps that is the real lesson. That knowledge is never lost, only buried, only encoded, only waiting. But the antediluvian world did not only leave myths. It left people, lineages, legacies. And one of them may have survived more than others. A city built by a man who walked with angels. A city of stars, books, and watchmen. The civilization of Enoch, biblical, apocryphal. In the kaleidoscope of ancient myths and fragmented scriptures, there is a figure that moves like ghost. It crosses all theological thresholds, too righteous for the earth, too human for heaven, too dangerous to forget. Enoch is mentioned only briefly in the canonical texts of Genesis, but expanded in vast prophetic volumes in the apocryphal book of Enoch. He is the man who walked with God and then was no more. Because God took him away. But what the later texts affirm is that God not only took him. He showed it to Enoch. He took him to the heavens, to the deep structure of reality, to the machinery behind all stars. And what he brought back, what he left behind, may be the last surviving thread of the oldest unrecognized civilization. Because the story of Enoch is not that of just a man, it is the story of a society. According to the book of Enoch, widely read among the first Christians, still canonical in the Ethiopian tradition and almost surgically removed from the Western Bible. Enoch was a scribe, a time watcher, or receiver of the wisdom of the so-called watchers, angelic beings who descended to earth to guide and protect and, ultimately, corrupt humanity. In this narration, Enoch becomes a mediator between worlds, documenting everything that the watchers reveal, from the structure of the cosmos to the secrets of metallurgy, the movements of stars and the roots of divination. These were not just simple tales. It was simply the preservation of data. The civilization of Enoch, if this term can be used, was built around knowledge, not the trial and error of slow agricultural invention, but the infusion of complete systems, calendars accurate to fractions of a day, angelic hierarchies traced in exhaustive detail, sacred geometry, astronomical mechanics, moral codes carved in stone before anyone even built cities. It was not simply a myth. It was infrastructure, and it was temporary. Because the writings of Enoch make clear that this civilization lived with numbered days. The Watchers, who were once guardians, had crossed the line. They had crossed with human women, giving rise to the Nephilim, beings of terrifying size and intellect. They taught humanity secrets too heavy to bear. The balance broke. And the solution was brutal, a flood to wipe the board. But not before carrying out one last act of preservation. God orders Enoch to write all down. All his visions, all his knowledge, all the forbidden teachings. He is told to hide these books, to bury them for future generations, for the wise of the end times. What kind of civilization builds not only for its own survival, but for the restart of human history? What kind of knowledge is so volatile that it has to be encrypted in scriptures, sealed in caves and transmitted only in whispers? We do not know what the cities of Enoch were like. There are no ziggurats left. There are no ruins that bear his name. But his texts describe landscapes of great precision. Sacred mountains where the stars rise and set with purpose. Doors through which angels emerge in specific seasons. Vaults where winds and spirits are stored as data. It was not about superstition. It was a cosmic operating system of fusion between science, spirit and geometry. And if the city in which Enoch lived existed, then it was not created for longevity. It was created for pure transmission. A node in a wider network of pre-diluvian civilizations that stretched across what we now call mythological geography. Eridu, Varka, MW, Atlantis, Shambhala. Each city played a role, each city carried a different piece of the code. But Enoch's piece was unique. It was recursive in nature. It was about the cycle itself, the rise and fall, the moral decay, the flood, the survivors, the observers, the next rise. Because Enoch not only received the prophecy, he became a true prophet. And in the most chilling passages of the apocryphal books, he not only describes the past, but also our future. He sees civilizations fall one after another. He sees towers built to the sky and knocked down by fire. He sees the stars disordered, the earth poisoned. He speaks of a generation of iron and clay. One that will have all knowledge and no wisdom. One that will forget the flood. One that will repeat it. And if that is true, if Enoch was not only a mythical character, but a historical cipher, then his civilization did not disappear. It was hidden in texts erroneously labeled as dreams of religious fanatics, in measures embedded in sacred architecture. In astronomical alignments discarded as coincidences, in oral traditions, underground vaults and dusty parchments no one dares to fully translate because Enoch was not only trying to save his world. He was trying to warn ours. What kind of civilization codifies a warning for over 10,000 years? What kind of disaster forces a man to become myth? A city to become allegory? A culture to become writing, in a cataclysm, not of fire or ice, but of oblivion. The civilization of Enoch is the ghost of a memory, glimpsed in the Apocrypha, buried in metaphors and beating through every flood, myth and echo of the golden age that the world left behind. And if his books remain hidden, if the cave where he kept them still exists, buried in some unexplored ridge, in some unexcavated tomb, in some forgotten library in Ethiopia or the Dead Sea, they are not only religious texts. They are instruction manuals for survival, for memory, for the next cycle. Because the flood was not the end of world. It was the firewall. And all that we are is monuments. Our machines, our stories may just be corrupt downloads of what Enoch tried to save. But not all survivors wrote books. Some built cities. Others built exiles. And one of them was condemned to walk east of Eden to a place that no one wants to find. The land of Nod. The land of Nod. Biblical. It begins with a murder, an act of violence, raw and intimate, between brothers. Cain kills Abel and the earth opens its mouth to drink the blood. That moment is the rupture, the first crime, the first fracture in the mythical perfection of early human life. And for that reason, Cain is not killed. He is marked, banished, condemned to wander. He is sent east of Eden, to the land of Nod. It is one of the most cryptic phrases in Genesis. A phrase so simple that it is barely noted. Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, east of Eden. That's all. Without explanation, without geography, without description of the people who were already there. But the implications are transcendental because when Cain arrives in Nod, he does not wander alone. He builds a city. He gets married. He has a son. Enoch, who is not the same as the prophetic scribe of the apocryphal books, and baptizes the city with his name. Stop. Think. He builds a city. For whom? The Bible tells us that at that time there are only 4 human beings. Adon, Eva, Cain and now Abel, who is dead. So, who lives in Nod? Who does Cain fear when he says, "Whoever finds me will kill me"? For whom is he building this city? Unless there were already other people there. Unless the land of Nod was not a desert, nor a punishment, but an encounter, a meeting point between post-identical humans and a civilization so ancient, so forgotten, that even the scriptures refuse to pronounce its name. This is a crack in the narrative. The implication that humanity did not begin in the void, that it arose in a world already inhabited, that the Garden of Eden was not the only axis of the world, but one among many, and that east of Eden, in the land of Nod, something else endured, something older, something different. Let's follow these breadcrumbs. Cain builds a city. That implies planning, materials, labor, mathematics, and a purpose. They are not the actions of cursed nomad. They are the traces of a heritage, of someone who encounters a landscape already shaped by knowledge, perhaps by ruins, perhaps by survivors, perhaps by an older civilization shattered by a convulsion, something worse, reduced to shadows and echoes. Cain does not create the city from scratch. He claims it, gives it a name, leaves a mark on a place already marked. And that is where things become complicated. The descendants of Cain are not primitive. They are innovators. His lineage includes Jubal, the father of all who play stringed instruments and flutes, and Tubal-Cain, a forger of all kinds of tools of bronze and iron. It is not about just agricultural achievements. They are technological, metallurgical, of musical theory, artisanal. Does this sound familiar to you? This echoes the apocryphal Watchmen, forbidden knowledge, antediluvian technology. What if Cain didn't bring civilization to Nod? What if he found civilization there? Did he find a land of survivors, remains of a city before the flood, ruins half buried under the sand and silence, and unleash something new or worse, awaken something? Because the mark of Cain is not only a curse, it is also protection. God says, if anyone kills Cain, he will be avenged 7 times. Why? Why protect a murderer? Unless Cain's journey was not a punishment, but preservation. Unless he carried something dangerous, something necessary. A fragment of human memory that had to be kept alive. Even if that meant exiling him, the land of Nod then becomes something more than just a geographical location. It becomes a metaphor for all places that history refuses to recognize. It is the periphery, the limit, the area outside the map where memory is exiled and civilizations fade into folklore. Every culture has its own nod. The hidden land, the cursed city, the place that no one visits and everyone fears. In Sumeria, that is Kur. In Egypt, that is Da. In India, that is Naraka. In Mesoamerica, that is Zabala. And they all exist east of something sacred. East of the center, east of paradise. And perhaps, just perhaps, they're all the same place. Or the same idea. A civilization that absorbed the fallen. Not only morally fallen, but also technologically fallen. Civilizations that knew too much, that shone too brightly, that rebuilt themselves too quickly and were told to wait. That they wander, that they disappear in silence until they are needed again. Because the land of Nod isn't the end of Cain's story. It is the beginning of a new timeline, a new lineage, a branch of humanity that walks in parallel to the lineage of Adon. Separated, marked, in possession of tools, songs and iron too soon, too advanced, too deliberate. And as the ages passed, the waters rose, Babel fell, and the maps were redrawn, Nod may have sunk into the earth, ascended to myth, or simply become the next world. Because if you keep walking east from Eden through memory, metaphor, myth, you arrive at the place where all pieces begin to reappear. Scattered, encoded, waiting, a chain of islands across the Pacific. A cradle that perhaps has never been on the water. The kingdom they called Mu. Mu. Lemuria. Linked to cultures of the Pacific Islands. Mu Lemuria. The names flicker like mirages on maps that do not exist. More names whispered in pseudo-historical texts, New Age esotericism, and crumbling margins of colonial-era anthropology. Most scholars roll their eyes. They classify Mu and Lemuria as discredited theories, hallucinogenic remains of 19th-century attempts to explain evolution's enigmas. But under the myth, beyond fiction, buried in the stone memories of Polynesia, Micronesia and Melanesia, there is something more. Perhaps it is not proof, but it is a pattern. And patterns have power. Let's eliminate the noise. Let's forget the Victorian mystics and the theosophical sects that claimed that the Lamrians were ethereal beings 36 meters tall with a third eye and translucent skin. Let's forget the fanfiction about crossing with Atlantis. Let's focus on what remains when the fog dissipates, an older and more elemental idea. That once there was a vast land in the Pacific, an extensive continent or superarchipelago, now lost under the sea. And that land, whatever name it left behind, continues to resonate. Culturally, architecturally, linguistically, and spiritually. It did not disappear. It dissolved into the bloodstream of the Pacific. Let's start with the stones. Throughout the Pacific, scattered like fossilized breadcrumbs, there are megalithic structures that should not exist. On the island of Pompeii, in Micronesia, is Nanmadal, an artificial complex of more than 90 islets built with gigantic basalt columns, some of which weigh 50 tons, stacked with an astonishing precision. There are no quarries nearby. No iron tools have been found. Oral traditions say that the stones were transported by magic. Magic, technology, or the memory of a lost method. Further east, on Easter Island, the Rapanui find the Moai. Enormous stone heads with their torsos buried underground, aligned along magnetic lines, with their backs to the ocean, as if guarding something inside or protecting what remains behind them. The indigenous Rapanui speak of an earlier race, the Long Ears, who built the Moai and ruled the island before being overthrown. Legends of collapse, civil war, and forgotten knowledge. And then there is Tonga, with its entree a trilithon, a stone gate weighing more than 30 tons, or the stepped pyramids of Tahiti, or the ruined platforms of Hawaii, or the foundations still buried that are found under the waters of Yonaguni, Guam, and even Fiji. This is not a scattered coincidence. It is infrastructure. The scattered remains of a civilization that may once have stretched for thousands of kilometers through a territory now submerged, fragmented, erased not by oblivion, but by floods. Let's talk about languages. Polynesian languages are very clustered. Despite being spoken in a territory that covers a third of the globe, its linguistic divergence is surprisingly small. This implies a relatively recent and sudden expansion not well explained by conventional anthropology. And yet, some roots of the Pacific languages have parallels in the Dravidian languages of southern India and in the Tamil places, often linked to the Lamrian myths. Coincidence? Perhaps. Or perhaps we are facing the broken mirror of an older language. A global dove born from the survivors of the flood who rebuild a scattered island like punctuation marks in the open ocean. Let's move on to myth. Almost all island cultures in the Pacific have legends about floods. The Hawaiian chants tell of a great flood sent by the gods to cleanse the earth. The Samoan stories tell of islands swallowed by the sea. The Maori traditions of New Zealand speak of Hawaii, the ancestral homeland on the other side of the ocean and the island that disappeared under the waves. The legends of Rapanui tell of a land that was once enormous, home to the creators of the Moai, now sunken and disappeared. Again and again, the same story arises. A lost homeland. A catastrophe overcome, a dispersion, a reconstruction. Does this sound familiar to you? It should. It is the story of Atlantis, of Noah, of Enoch, of Dvarka, of all the lost cities and civilizations that we have tracked in this narration. The only difference is that this time the location is the Pacific. And the scale is immeasurable. Some theorists believe that Mu extended from the current Easter Island to Indonesia. Others claim that it encompassed present-day Oceania. Some imagine it as a physical continent, others as a network of cultural superorganisms sustained by trade, rituals and memory, shattered by rising sea levels and the trauma of oblivion. And the trauma is real. Genetic studies show that many Pacific Islanders have traces of ghost lineages of unknown ancestry that do not match any known continental population. Neither Asian, African, nor Native American. Something else, something older, something that was left behind. Let's talk about astronomy. On the other side of the Pacific, ancient navigation was not only a practical matter, but sacred. Polynesian navigators used the stars, the ocean swell, the routes of birds and bioluminescent plankton to cross thousands of kilometers of open ocean without maps, compasses, or metal. This knowledge was not the fruit of intuition. Where was it inherited from? From whom? What kind of civilization trains its memory to survive only through songs, through the skin, through rituals? A civilization that knows that writing can be lost. That the monuments can sink. That only history can survive the flood. Perhaps that was Mu. Not a landmass, but a mass of memory. A civilization not of towers and roads, but of codocultural DNA scattered throughout the islands to act as reset nodes for the next world. Each island, a data package. Each myth, a compression algorithm. And if that is true, then the Pacific is not empty. It's a hard drive. And we have barely scratched the surface. Because if more Lemuria existed and if its fragments gave rise to the cultures that we now call indigenous, then the world we know is a post-museum civilization built not from scratch, but from the surface down. And the question is no longer whether it existed. It is how much of it remains. Because the last civilizations on our list may not have sunk or disappeared. They may still be visible, still standing, still encoded in the mystery of cities that officially exist but carry something inexplicable in their bones. And the first of them, the cities of the Indus Valley, the civilization of the Indus Valley, the early Pravetic. At the northwestern end of the Indian subcontinent, between the rugged Himalayas and the arid Thar Desert, a civilization arose so suddenly and completely that even its ruins distill a kind of quiet arrogance. It did not build ziggurats to reach the gods. It did not sculpt giant statues of its rulers. It did not obsess over conquest. It built silent, perfect, unbreakable systems. This was the civilization of the Indus Valley, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Rakhigarhi, and Dhalavira, although its ruins have been dated approximately to 2600, 1900, 4600, and 4900 BCE. See, each new discovery pushes back the line of origin until we stand on the threshold of prehistory, looking at a mirror that should not exist. Because what we find in the Indus is not a civilization in its formation. It is a civilization that already existed. From the moment its bricks are discovered, we see standardization. The same size, the same proportions, the same materials in cities separated by hundreds of kilometers, streets aligned in precise grids, drainage systems more advanced than those of many 19th-century European cities, multi-story houses, centralized green areas, reservoirs the size of stadiums, public baths, and urban planning with a level of foresight and symmetry that would make modern city councils blush. And then there is the mystery. There are no monuments, no palaces, no evidence of kings or empires, no great conquests engraved in stone, no deciphered writings. They had writing. Thousands of seals with strange glyphs, elephants, unicorns, geometric patterns, human-animal hybrids, but no Rosetta Stone has been found, nor any bilingual inscriptions. The language of the Indus remains stubbornly silent, as if refusing to tell its story until we are ready to listen, or even worse, until we remember it. Because this is where it begins to open. The cities of the Indus were not built randomly over centuries. They were planned, designed, and that planning includes celestial alignments, environmental optimization, and resistance to floods and earthquakes. Only in Mohenjo-Daro, the so-called Great Bath is a marvel of hydraulic engineering, with advanced water management systems, roofing materials, and an architectural proportionality that suggests a philosophical obsession with balance. But who were they? Conventional history says they were peoples of the early Bronze Age, part of the urbanization wave that swept Mesopotamia and Egypt. But that does not explain the anomaly, because the Indus did not imitate. They did not follow the example. They were not part of a learning curve. It was a transfer. It arrived too complete, too fast, too different. Let's delve deeper. Satellite images and recent excavations have revealed that the Indus River was once flanked by another even larger river, the mythical Sarasvati, which for a long time was believed symbolic. The Vedic texts describe this river as the lifeblood of a forgotten, earlier culture. And now, under the dry soil of Haryana and Rajasthan, archaeologists are finding huge ancient settlements along a course that coincides with that of the long-lost Sarasvati. These settlements are older than Harappa, older than Mohenjo-Daro. Some date back to 5000 BC. Some perhaps even earlier. And the people who lived there not only survived, but excelled. The Vedic texts, the Rigveda, the Brahmanas speak of a golden age of powerful cities built by Asuras and Devas, not as mere myths, but with architectural details, fortresses with 100 gates, cities in the sky, technologies of light and vibration, flying vehicles vimanas, weapons that could destroy entire populations with heat and fire. In conventional academia, these accounts are dismissed as poetic exaggerations. In Vedic cosmology, they are memories. What if those memories did not begin in the Vedic period? What if they were cultural fossils encoded in hymns, preserved in rituals, transmitted from an earlier era, an Indus era? Because when the Vedic Aryans arrived on the subcontinent, whether by migration, invasion, or assimilation, they did not find a desert. They found cities. And instead of destroying them, they absorbed their remains, their water systems, their astronomical knowledge, their philosophical frameworks. So maybe the Indus Valley did not collapse. Perhaps it went from stone to poetry, from architecture to ideology, with its physical cities buried under time and floods. Its mental cities were reborn in the Vedic scriptures and in the silence of its writing. Maybe it was something deliberate. Perhaps knowledge was too volatile to be expressed, too sacred to be explained. So it was encoded in rituals, in alignments, in silence. Because not all memories are vocal, some are spatial, others hydraulic, others are sung and others wait under 5,000 years of sediments, watching us confuse absence with emptiness. The Indus Valley is not just another ancient civilization. It is the last page of a book that we do not know how to read. A book written before the flood, before Babel, before the fall. And maybe, just maybe, it contains the ultimate key to all others. Because if the ruins of the Indus are followed westward, along the dry beds of the rivers and the disappeared trade routes, one begins to hear the same rhythm in Sumer, in Egypt, in Dilmun, in Atlantis. These are not copies.